So every year since I've been dating my fiance, 6 years, we take a 2-week vacation. Me and the fiance like to switch it up. One year it's a nice resort or cruise, then the next a road trip or camping trip. So last summer, we had it in our minds to get in our SUV, load our things, the doggo, go across our state to Nevada, see a bit of Nevada, then to Northern California. We have rules on these road trips. We have to stop at every roadside attraction, and staying at crazy hotels and motels are a must. So when I discovered there was a clown museum in northern Nevada in a town called Tonopah, I knew we had to stay there. Why? Well, fiance hates clowns, like despises them, and that meant we needed to stay there. I made reservations for one night, and when we got into Tonopah, we dropped Doggo off at a friend of ours for the night. I don't remember if they allow animals, but my friend has a lot of land, and we wanted Doggo to run herself ragged and get energy out. So we pull up to this motel, and there's a ton of truckers, some bikers milling around. Fiance can handle her own, she's a cop, so I left her in the car while I ran in to check in. Figured I would check us then we could get washed up and go to dinner. I go inside to check in, and that is when this big, burly lesbian trucker makes her way up to my fiancé. I come out after securing our room key and see her bent over by the driver's window, wearing her cut-off flannel shirt, Levi jeans, and would look like genuine rattlesnake crap-kicker cowboy boots. I saw my fiancé wearing her. I'm trying to be nice, but I'm losing my cool face, so I clear my throat so I can get into the vehicle. She turns around, sneering as she looks me up and down, toothpick jutting out of a mouth that hadn't seen a dentist in quite a while. "You sure skinny here is satisfying your needs?" She cackled her fetid breath in my face, while my fiancé exclaimed that I satisfied her just fine. So she shrugs and saunters over to the group of other truckers. I sigh in relief and we go to our room. I'd like to say that that is the last we saw of her and leave the story at that, but that's not the case. That night we were in bed, after a round of nocturnal activities. I'm smoking a cigarette, mindlessly shuffling through the few channels, and fiancé is browsing the web. There is a knock on the door. We ask who it is, and I hear someone running away from the door. I get out of bed, wrapping a towel around my waist, and stick my head out of the door. No one. After that, there wasn't any more knocks, so we went to bed, and woke up early the next day. As we were pulling out, I noticed a semi following us. I chalked it up to someone pulling out and shrugged it off. However, when the semi still follows us as we head out to my buddy's farm, we start getting creeped out. I am about 3 minutes from turning onto my buddy's driveway. He has lots of land and a long driveway, when the semi gets so close to the back bumper, it's almost pushing us. Fiancé pulls out a phone to call the police, and I swerve into the driveway to book it up to my buddy's driveway. Meanwhile, the semi stops, the doors open, and 3 truckers get out. 2 big butch lesbians, one being my fiancé's admirer, and a big dude, easily 400 or 450 pounds. Luckily, my buddy is a crazy survivalist, gun enthusiast, and he comes out of his garage with his guns. Fiancé and I are seriously freaking out, thinking we were going to get in the middle of some crazy gunfight, when the truckers quickly get in their truck and leave. We were going to dial the police, but our friend assured us that they wouldn't be bothering us anytime soon. We quickly gathered up Doggo and got the heck out of Dodge.
So it's a Sunday. I'm bored, so I decide to finally put this on here for you guys. Back in 2005, I was 18, just dropped out of high school in MN. It was about halfway through the school year, and I didn't have the credits I needed to graduate. I had some health problems my junior year, and was altogether frustrated with my life at this point. I was more concerned with drinking than school, so I dropped out, bought a plane ticket to go and live about an hour or so north of Seattle with my cousin in Washington State. I also had some friends that were a year older than me living down in Seattle. I would occasionally drive down to the city to spend a few days with them, to go to concerts, stuff like that. After a particular stint in Seattle, I decided to head back north to my cousin's place. Me, being the financially impaired individual that I am, I left Seattle without $1 to my name. I'm getting on the road. I realise I'm very low on gas. I figure I'll make it though, but of course, about 20 miles short of my exit, the car that I'm driving begins to putter. Luckily for me though, I'm coming up to a rest area, so I pull in and go to the payphone to begin to call the very few contacts I know in this state. I had no money, so I had to call collect. So, I get a hold of my cousin. He happens to be about 3 hours away in his hometown, and drunk no less. No luck. That's when I call his girlfriend. She never answers. Everyone I know in Seattle doesn't own a car. I'm kind of host. My friend calls and says that he's in the hometown in the morning and he can pick me up on the way. So it looks as though I'm spending the night at the rest stop. So I get settled in, recline in my seat, using my hoodie as a blanket. I'm there for about a good 20 minutes when a van pulls into the rest area. It's one of those Chevy vans. The van parks and out gets your typical creeper, about 5'4", pudgy, balding, thick glasses. The creeper begins walking around the parking area, glancing into all of the cars that are parked. There's about 3 other cars at the same time. He walks slowly, right in front of my car, and just stares me down for what feels like hours. At this point, I'm pretty sure my future involves being referenced in a documentary about serial killers. So, the creepy guy gets back into his van and parks it so he's directly behind me on the other side of the lot. I am parked facing the bathroom area. He's now facing the woods. At this point, I'm no longer reclined and relaxed. I'm now sitting quite awake. I'm not taking my eyes off this idiot. I can look in my side view mirror and see him at his side view mirror just staring. This goes on for about 2 hours. He occasionally gets out of his van to go stand in the woods in the darkness. I could tell he was watching me because I could see the cherry on his cigarette light up as he would inhale. At this point, I'm pretty on edge and have to pee badly. There is no way in hell that I'm gonna walk to the bathroom with this guy around. I decided instead to call the state patrol. They say they're gonna send a trooper after I explain the situation. So I hang the phone up. I'm kind of pacing around, all the while keeping my eye on this creeper. After about 30 seconds, the payphone rings. I'm thinking it's State Patrol. I answer. Hello? Caller. Do you want to get sexual? I don't reply. Then they say, let's get sexual. I say hell no. I slam the receiver down. I really don't know what to think of this. The creeper has a payphone number and is calling me up from the woods. I am terrified at this point. Kind of froze, but ready to run 1,000,000 miles if necessary. I've got my eye on the woods. The phone rings again. Can't decide to answer it or not. I don't want to miss State Patrol if they're calling for some reason, so I answer silently. The creeper goes, come on, let me get sexual. I ain't gonna hurt you. I might pay ya. At this point in time, the creepers threaten me, so I immediately go to rage mode. I start quickly for my car when I remember there's an axe handle in the back end that I'm supposed to use in situations like this. Now, as I'm walking towards the car, The creeper starts out of the woods and is walking towards me. I get to my car, grab the axe handle, and start towards this guy, pointing at him. "Get back in your van, or I'm gonna bash your skulls in." He stops in his tracks, stares at me, kind of assessing. He then turns around, gets in his van, and slowly drives away, staring at me. I am completely shaken due to the adrenaline when the trooper finally arrives. So I tell him the whole story, and he takes my information and says he can drive me up the highway to Denny's, so I can at least rest the rest of the night safe there. He says if we can go first, to go to the other side of the highway to see if the guys just switched areas. He might be at the other rest area. I said sure. We pull into the rest area, and lo and behold, the van's there. The trooper approaches the van and is talking to the guy for another 5 minutes. I can tell the trooper's given him a 3rd degree, sticking his finger in his face, raising his voice. The trooper then returns to tell me about the situation. Apparently, there's nothing he could do to charge the guy at this point in time. The guy doesn't have a license. He claims a friend dropped him off. He was waiting for him to return. The trooper told him if he was still there when he passed back though, he would be arrested for trespassing, and also that if any other troopers saw him, he would be arrested for not having a license. The trooper also told me that he had several pairs of binoculars. He had a big bag of candy as well. So I get dropped at Denny's, and my cousin eventually picks me up. I tell him the story. We have a good laugh being able to look back on it. We go back the next day with a can full of gas to get my car. End of story. Nah. We arrive at my car, and there is a note under my wiper from the creeper. It was written in the form of a poem. I don't remember exactly how it went, but it's along these lines. You should have shut your mouth. Somebody should have taught you not to snitch. You're gonna regret it. It went on for several pages, but I can't remember more. The guy had cut all the brake lines and everything. He was trying to stop my car. We called for the troopers again. They came and took the note and took some information. It wasn't even my car. A friend of mine had been visiting from NN and wanted to buy a car and road trip back to MN. He decided against it and left the car and said I should use it. He would make plans to get it later. I didn't stay in Washington much longer though. I spoke to an investigator once more, but nothing ever come of it. I don't know why. They knew who the guy was and everything. I was over it and wanted to move on. For the short time I was in Washington after this, me and my cousin were pulling to every rest stop we passed hoping to find him, but we never did.
Now recently I thought my bouts with the paranormal were finally over, but I'll end with one that happened just a couple of weeks ago. This one isn't nearly as scary as the others in my opinion, but it's still a good one. It's common knowledge that truck drivers often have CB radios installed. They're usually used, or at least in my case, to communicate with other drivers and let them know of any traffic accidents and road delays. Us drivers like to look out for each other. This night in particular, I was having a full-on conversation with someone. I guess they were around 10 miles ahead of me at the time, and he was giving me a little heads up about a rollover that was being cleaned up. A rollover being a car that careened off the road and flipped. I thanked him and continued on with the conversation. He interrupted me at one point though. His voice had changed from passive and bored to scared and alert. He explained that he had just pulled over at a rest stop, one that I was about 8 miles from and had just seen a sign for, and there was something walking around out there. He said he had planned on sleeping after being on the road for 8 hours with no break, but now he was afraid to get out or even try to go to sleep. "I need to keep this thing in sight," he said. That really freaked me out. I told him to just chill out. I'd be there soon and we could take shifts if that made him feel better. He said sure, but then he began describing it. According to him, it looked almost human. Its head was too small and its body too long. It was completely naked, but he couldn't see any genitals. The skin that covered it was a light gray, seemed wet, and was stretched tightly around its body, leading to extreme definition around the bones. It looked around the rest stop, seemingly sniffing for some type of meal. When it found one, my radio buddy got off long enough to vomit. When he came back, he said the thing ripped the head from a small rabbit and went about devouring it basically whole. Finally, I made it to the rest stop and tried to park as quickly as I could. I looked all across the tree line for this thing that my radio friend had described to me, but I couldn't see it anywhere. Then out of nowhere, I heard 2 gunshots fire out. I looked all around again and saw a driver, assumingly the one that I had been speaking to, firing at something that was now making off into the woods. The way it ran was similar to a quadruped, but its gait was off. I'm not sure how to explain it. I jumped out of the truck and ran over to the guy, making sure to make myself known. We met up and explained that he had finally given in and decided to try to make it to the bathroom. As he was coming out, this thing was standing a few feet from the door and hissed at him when he had stepped out. As soon as it started coming toward him, he pulled out his 9mm and fired at it. I believe it landed somewhere near its lung, according to him. The small trail of black, inky-like liquid leading to the woods solidified that. Not long after that, we took to staying in our trucks and sleeping in shifts to make sure that if the thing were to come back, we could warn the other. We made it through the rest of the night without incident. That's another story where I'm left totally confused. I have never seen something like what he had described. I'm not aware of any kind of animal who has black blood. The whole situation was incredibly strange. That driver and I actually stayed in contact for a short amount of time after that, but we eventually went our separate ways. Our paths still cross here and there, though. We use those moments to reminisce and try to get an idea of what we had to deal with that night. Well, I've got to get back on the road. I hope you guys and gals get a kick out of some of these. I still haven't made sense as to why I'm so attracted to the paranormal. Or rather, why it's so attracted to me. But it was a lot of fun to finally share them with someone other than my wife. I'm sure she gets tired of hearing about them and the nightmares they cause.
I'm a proud Floridan. At the time of this story, early 2000s, I was going to college in South Florida and lived with my family in my hometown in the Florida Panhandle. It's about a 7-hour drive up through central Florida to get between the two places, so I mostly only went home for holidays. It was a Thanksgiving in my junior year, and I was excited that I managed to rearrange my midterms to be able to leave campus 3 days ahead of everyone. I was expecting to beat the masses of traffic and hoping for a quick trip back home. My roommates wanted to have a last meal together before we all left for break, so I ate in the campus dining hall at around 4 PM, and I set off on my journey around 5:30. Around 10 PM, I just passed my 2/3 mark, where I always stopped at this little mum and pop type diner by the side of the highway to grab a quick snack, use a restroom, call my dad to let him know I'm okay. Well, I hadn't been there since summer. The place was out of business. So a little bummed out that I wasn't getting my chocolate chip pancakes, I just kept on going. There really wasn't much built up around there at the time, so when I saw signs for a rest stop in, of all places on God's green earth, some town called Alacia, I went for it. So I went and parked directly under the streetlight for safety and user facilities. I called my dad, etc. I didn't see anyone else there, except for a very exhausted looking woman who approached me asking for directions, saying she was with her husband and 2 small children from Virginia, and they had made a wrong turn trying to get to Disney. So I left the rest area and was walking back to my car when I noticed a beat up, unmarked grey bluish work van parked this close to the driver's side of my Civic. Yeah, okay, that's pretty weird. It had Florida tags on it, so it could have been the ladies who I spoke to in the bathroom. I distinctly remembered she said she's from Virginia. I turned around and hightailed it back to the rest stop, promptly running into some random middle-aged guy with 2 boys. Getting to talk to him, it turned out his wife and I had spoken, and I left comfortable speaking to him. I told him what was going on with the van, and how I didn't know what to do. He said he's going to check it out, so he left the kids with his wife and started up to the driver's side of the van. He stood there for a moment before speaking. His voice was quivered. We could still hear him yelling from 100 feet away. "Excuse me, gentlemen. We already called the police, so I'm gonna have to politely suggest you get out of here." And then he ran back to us, grabbed his wife and kids, pointed to me with a swift "you," and said, "Come, let's get in the car now." We ran together. So here I am, confusedly sitting in the back of the stranger's SUV while he went to use the payphone to call the police. Meanwhile, the van peeled out of there like I've never seen it get out of there before. They ran up on the curb on their way out, burned rubber. The cops got there and found out what happened. The man went to go check out the van. He could see in it pretty well because I parked under the streetlight. The first thing he noticed was that all of the seats except for the driver's seat had been removed. There was a guy sitting in the driver's seat and a guy sitting in the back, a tarp laid out in the back, and a bunch of other random items back that he couldn't identify immediately. Neither of the guys were reading a newspaper or a map or anything. Apparently, they're just there staring at us. It still makes me feel sick thinking about it. So creepy guys in a van, I pray I never see you again.
I've been a truck driver for quite some time now. I'd say I'm pushing 10 years this summer. That said, I've seen some weird and spooky stuff out on the road. I'm not sure I have time to type out all of them here. I have to get back on the road soon actually, but I decided I'd share a few of the most notable ones. I've seen other people talk about the same things I believe that I witnessed. The first one is actually the earliest memory I have out on the road. I was shipping some kind of statue for a collector from North Carolina to Tennessee. Not a terribly long drive, but I'd only been going at this for around 6 months at this point. It was late and the road was dark. I remember just passing the Tennessee state line when my truck died. It didn't spit and sputter, it just shut off. The radio conked out, all the needles dropped to 0. I slowly came to a stop in the middle of the freeway. Believe me, I tried to get that thing towards the shoulder, but to my horror, the steering wheel had locked up as well. Once I was stopped, I stepped out and set up a handful of cones I had in the back around the truck to keep any late-night drivers from getting into an accident. Having no idea of what could have happened, I decided on calling the highway patrol so we could take care of this the correct way. After that was done, I'd call my client and let them know I'd be late. When I pulled up my phone, though, I had no service. I was roaming. I retreated back to my truck in hopes of using my Wi-Fi hotspot and getting in contact with someone that way. No matter what I tried, I couldn't get it to connect. I was out of options. Finally, I just decided I'd stand at the back of my truck so I could wave down anyone who may come by. I'd guess that 5 minutes passed before my patience had worn thin. I was annoyed, confused, and losing more money by the minute. But when I pulled my phone out again to check the time, all that faded away. Instead of anger, I was just confused. According to my phone, no time at all had passed. That's when a feeling of being watched fell over me. I looked all around only to be met with large fields on either side shrouded in darkness. I began hearing something though, like a low mechanical hum. Great. I thought someone must be coming down the road. Of course, I was wrong. The hum did slowly grow louder, but not from in front of me or behind me, rather from above me. Reluctantly, I looked up and saw a large gray and silver saucer in the air. There were lights around the circumference of it, with one large on the right in the middle acting as a sort of spotlight. I felt my heart rate skyrocket, and my entire vision was enveloped in white right before I fell to the ground. When I came to, there was a woman placing her jacket under my head and telling me to not move and that there was an ambulance on the way. Soon they were there, and before I knew it, I was in the hospital getting checked out. I knew I couldn't tell them about the thing I had seen in the sky. They'd think I was nuts. Instead, I told them my truck malfunctioned, and when I got out to check it, I suffered a dizzy spell and must have passed out. They took it for truth, and after I was given a clean bill of health, I was sent home. My truck was back in working order the following morning, and the company I drive for let someone take the delivery for me. We just split the pay. Despite all of the mysteries that I had been through, it was a fair deal, I suppose.
I was driving the annual 5-hour drive to my cousin's home, where my extended family meets every Christmas. I just gotten out of class that evening, so I was about 3 hours in, around 1 or 2 a.m. I stopped by a rest stop because I really needed to go to the restroom. I'd been to this restroom many times before, even since I was young, so it's always between my home and my cousin's. It's a little vacant, but usually around Christmas, there's a couple of families there in the day, then a few lone truckers or drivers in the night. Let me first describe the layout of the rest stop. It's somewhat forested by the road. It's almost laid out like a camping outpost. There's a square in the middle with some bulletin boards and vending machines. The front half of the squares, next to the parking lot, has a set of bathrooms, and the back half has another set. I parked there and noticed this time. It was not completely empty. It was late at night, but even the road was quieting down. There were no cars. Just felt really eerie. I walked from my car to get to the middle of the first half of the square, where I can see straight across, which was maybe 30 or 40 feet away. There I realized there was somebody really tall, like 7 feet tall. He's just standing away from the lamppost. He's literally just staring though. I don't know what else he could have been doing. I freeze. Think there's no possible way I can do anything against someone 3 times my size. I'm even more terrified on what would happen if I went in the girls' restroom and I see him there right at the door. So I turned around, started back to my car. He then starts walking in the same direction as me, keeping the same horizontal pace with me, while moving a little more diagonally, slowly closing the gap. When he gets almost halfway to me, I run up to my car, too scared to even look behind me. I hear him running across the grass. I get in my car, and back up as quick as I can. I can see him maybe 15 feet from my car, getting extremely close. I peel to the left, speeding back onto the highway, not looking back. It was the last part that really keeps me shaken up after that. Before, I was able to think that maybe he was just a janitor, a random person who just happened to go in my direction. But from then on, I knew for sure he was coming for me, and why or how did he get there? I saw no other cars or anything. I'll never forget that moment where I just froze, like a deer in headlights, seeing him just standing at that rest stop, out of the light, out of place, just staring at me.
A few months ago, I was driving back to school from visiting my parents. It's about a 2-hour drive, so I usually keep myself entertained with music. I'm a 5'3", 21-year-old female driving my dad's little old pickup truck alone in the leftmost lane of a 3-lane highway, dorking around to music on the radio. Suddenly, I notice a semi-truck going the exact same speed as me in the rightmost lane. Embarrassed for getting caught in dork mode, I stopped singing and dancing and tried to speed up so he couldn't see me anymore. He matched my speed, which ticked me off a little bit, so I looked at the driver. To my surprise, he was smiling and waving. Thrown off, I kind of chuckled and waved back. Big mistake. He moves over to the middle lane to be closer to me, and now he won't stop smiling and waving. At first I played nice, waving back a little because semi-truck beats tiny pickup truck any day, but I was mostly focusing on getting out of this guy's field of vision safely. I tried speeding up as fast as my truck would allow, about 90 miles per hour, and slowing down as suddenly as I could without endangering anyone behind me, but he would just match my speed no matter what. If there was someone coming up his lane, he'd move to the right at the last possible second and pass them before I could slow down and get behind them. He is a lot more practiced with reckless maneuvering than I do, so he has me trapped and he's using other cars to help him. The whole time he's smiling, waving, holding up the number 1 sign finger for some reason I still don't know, and rapidly losing any charm he once had. As this continues for about 5 miles, I get worried and call 911. I gave them a description of the truck, white cargo truck, black cab with some Pennsylvania company logo on it, and driver, balding middle-aged tan guy with a dirty blue t-shirt on. They advised me to pull off the emergency shoulder on the left, but I've never done that, and it looked too narrow, so I didn't feel comfortable doing that. At this point, he was passing someone else in the middle lane, and I finally had a chance to slow down and merge 2 lanes over to the rightmost lane. I started speeding past him so he couldn't trap me again, and the operator told me to take the closest service plaza about 5 miles away. She said he probably wouldn't follow me, so I could stop there for a few minutes before getting back on the highway. She told me to call if he did follow me, but again, he probably won't, so she hung up. Now he's still holding up the number 1 sign and smiling this creepy, increasingly perverted grin at me while I avoid eye contact. The service plaza is in a quarter mile, and I'm not using any turn signals, but I guess he knew what I was doing because he braked hard and merged right behind me right at the last second to join me in exiting to the service plaza. After I get my heart to start back up from the coronary it just experienced, I call 911 again. Now the way the service plaza was set up was that semi-trucks had to use a separate lane winding to the right of the plaza that led to a parking lot behind the plaza just for big trucks. The rest of us used a smaller lane to park immediately in front of the plaza. I parked, and as I'm explaining to the new operator what's going on, I watch the semi creep around its path while the driver stares me down, smiling. I freaked. He knew where I had parked. He knew where to find me if I just stayed there. I thought maybe I could have floored it to get back on the highway, but I was afraid he would see me and follow me again. So I drove to a gas station to the left of the plaza which has a view of the semi-truck parking lot, hoping he couldn't find me until police came. The operator transfers me to the woman who was helping me before. She informs me that they've dispatched a couple of cars, but couldn't tell me how long they would be. I see the trucker has gotten out of his truck and is heading towards me. Even though my windows are closed and my doors are locked, I'm panicking on the phone to the operator. She tells me the police should be there soon and I should be safe there, so I should sit tight while I keep her updated. I wanted to at least drive back to the parking lot I was in before, but it's a one-way entrance to the gas station, so I couldn't. I glared at the trucker and showed him my phone when he came close. He finally stopped smiling and made it look like he was going into the service plaza. I looked in my right view mirror and found him hiding behind a big white pillar in front of the plaza, staring at me. Again, I freaked out and asked the operator where the cops were and if I could leave because he's being ultra creepy. She tells me to sit tight again because they should be there any minute, so I do. Then he comes out of hiding and starts walking towards my truck. I put it in drive just in case and tell the operator what he's doing. I refuse to make eye contact with him, but I keep watching my mirrors to make sure I know where he is. The smile is back, and he starts walking circles around my truck, looking at it as if he's looking for a way to get in. I couldn't take it anymore. I waited until he circled back behind me, floored it, and told the operator I'm not waiting one more second for the police. She apologized and told me the police would look for the man and talk to him if they found him, and that I should focus on getting home safely while keeping an eye out for him. I don't know if they did that or not, but I know none of that would have happened if I had my boyfriend with me. So it's good to know that not only can't I walk alone, but I also can't drive alone as a female.
It took place sometime around 1995. I was about 2 years old, but my younger brother hadn't been born yet. My mum and father were travelling to Atlanta, GA, because my dad hadn't had a chance to move up in the company he was working for. Now my parents are young parents. They had been on the interstate all day, driving from South Florida, and I fussily awoke in my car seat, needing a change. My father pulled into a rest stop, right up to the bathrooms, and briefly looks around. There were no other cars or people in the site that we're at, so he stood outside to smoke as my mother unstrapped me from the car seat, proceeding to take me inside. My dad has always been paranoid, and always used, and still does, carry a weapon whenever he travels in case of emergency. He collected the gun from under the driver's seat and proceeded to alight smoke. As he stood puffing on the cigarette, he noticed a shadow detaching itself from afar. He realizes it's behind a poster with bulletins on it. Because of the angle he's standing at, he was slightly behind the car and hid from view from the man that was now walking across the parking lot. This man was a tall, skinny-looking white guy that dressed in all dark clothing, dark jeans, black hoodie, etc. My dad watches carefully as this guy slowed down around the parking lot, heading straight for the bathroom that my mum had just disappeared into with me. My dad casually stepped into the light and flashed a gun in his hand with a gentle shake of his head. Apparently, the guy stopped right in his tracks, stared with my dad. Somehow, he hadn't noticed my dad's presence in the car, possibly too preoccupied with watching my mum and I. The guy put his hands in the air and backed away slowly before hightailing out of there. My dad hollered for my mum and hightailed it out of there. This is one of my favourite stories of my dad. I'm so glad that he carried a weapon that day.
The two previous stories my wife both know about. These two, however, have never left my mind. You all should feel lucky. The first takes place around the 5-year mark, so not too long after my encounter with the man at the rest stop. I was heading up to Michigan to drop something off when I noticed a man on the side of the road. The roads were fairly quiet that night, so I could see why he would go unnoticed. He didn't have his thumb out or anything. He was slumped over the guardrail. I'd say I was about 100 yards from him and could make out a hoodie and some type of liquid glistening from the light from the headlights. I had all intentions of trying to pull over somewhere and help him, but as I approached, his body lifted up and sort of dragged itself the rest of the way over the rail. It's hard to explain how unnatural it looked. His body moved like it had no bones. Before I knew it, he was making his way straight into the road. I blew my horn, rolled the windows down, and screamed, but he just stood there directly in the line of fire. A split second passed where I knew I would be responsible for someone's death, that I would take someone out of someone else's life forever. I tried to stop, but even as the truck slowed, I knew I was going to collide with this poor soul. As he disappeared from my sight, my eyes slammed shut, anticipating the impact, but it never came. I told myself he'd jumped out of the way and was okay, that I had nothing to worry about because he was obviously not hurt, aside from whatever injury he'd sustained that put him in the position he was in. The truck finally came to a stop, and I immediately jumped out to see if he was okay. Man, I looked all over for that guy, but he was nowhere to be seen. I walked up and down the highway for at least half an hour, calling out and asking if he was all right. I looked by the guardrail as well, but it was pointless. This guy was nowhere to be seen. I still don't know where he could have went.
In the mid-1970s, while my dad was with a law school, my family was living in Washington State. While there, my mother's good friend had a very strange encounter. This is her story. She was having trouble one rainy afternoon and pulled off into a rest stop to check it out. Washington is a particularly wooded area, so many rest stops feel secluded and are often not visible from the highway. After a few minutes, a guy pulled up in a Volkswagen Beetle and parks behind her. He was well dressed, properly groomed. He was handsome enough, but gave her creepy chills. He said to her, "Do you need any help?" and offered a ride. At this point, the rain was pretty intense, and she said that, under ordinary circumstances, she may have taken him up on the offer, but the hair on the back of her neck stood up, and for no desirable reason, all she wanted to do was get away from him. He continued to pester her for a minute or two, making witty jokes, trying to flirt. Just then, another car pulled into the rest area. The man quickly said goodbye and calmly walked back to his car, pulling away slowly, smiling at her. About a year or two later, she recognized a picture of him on the news as a man who recently got caught and was suspected of multiple murders across the West and Northwest US. It was Ted Bundy. I don't know a lot about him, but from what I understand, it was not uncommon for him to lure women into his car. I set out fairly early on a road trip where I was going to visit some distant family. They were quite a long way, so this meant it was going to be a number of days that I'd be on the road alone. No problem though. I kind of found a certain amount of tranquility doing these trips alone. I don't know why, it kind of brought the best out of me, and it was something I enjoyed doing. Now on one particular morning during this trip, it was very foggy out and I ended up on some dirt road. I wasn't exactly sure where I was going, and there was something wrong with my navigation on my phone, so I kind of had to just trust the process with this one. Now there was snowfall somewhat recently, and it started covering an embankment on the side of the road, and the fog set in pretty heavily. It meant that I absolutely had to stop at times because I could have easily just went off the other edge and down into a big pit, and without cell service I wouldn't have really been able to get rescued. I actually don't know what I would have done, but hey, I continue on. Now something I found really weird is that the trees kind of cast little shadows amongst themselves. It's hard to describe, but basically I couldn't figure out exactly where the sunlight was, so it made driving quite difficult. So I basically continue at a slow pace and ended up turning on the radio. I was trying to distract myself from whatever was happening and just not panic about the fog. This went on for quite a while until eventually I make it out into a clearing, and it's not really too foggy now and it made for nicer driving. If any of you have ever driven in the fog like that, it becomes kind of a balance game where you have to make the decision between driving quick and driving cautious, and it's quite frustrating because sometimes you'll basically be going at a snail's pace and you know you're not really getting anywhere, but you can't speed up because of the safety of yourself and others. Back on the main road, I felt fairly confident now. There was a good few other cars around and they made me feel pretty good in myself. So I'd been driving for a number of hours and decided that it was about time I went and stopped at a rest station, and one happened to come up. Now this thing looked like nobody had been there for years, but I saw some lights in the main building there and I needed to go and get some food from the store. I ended up going in, and the guy in there said I was the first person he'd seen all day, and I jokingly said, yeah, I can kind of tell. Where are we? And he kind of explained where we were, but I couldn't remember it too well, so sorry I can't provide you with this detail currently listening to this. But anyway, we chatted for a while and I bought some candy. Now I don't think that I have diabetes, but I kind of feel a bit weak suddenly sometimes, and I think the sugar rush definitely helps keep me on track. I also got some coffee, and my god, I can tell you, this is the worst coffee that I've ever tasted in my life. I kind of forced it down because I thought, well, at least it's going to keep me awake. But I soon learned that wasn't a good idea, as I started to feel a bit nauseous. I make my way back over to my car, and I remember distinctly feeling like something was different now. I couldn't describe exactly what it was, but it was a really weird feeling. I get back in my car and I continue on my adventure. Now while I'm driving, I noticed that some of the back windows start to become fairly messed up, which I think is really odd, because I had kind of a face covering on to keep me warm, so there shouldn't be any of my moisture from my mouth going to the back windows. I kind of learned to ignore it and decide that I need to just stop for a while and just enjoy myself. I make it to an area that has a small park. I lock my car and head off in there, still eating some of the candy that I have left. Now at this point I'm not really feeling too good. I have some kind of toothache in the back of my mouth, and my belly feels quite weird. I don't really feel like I'm gonna vomit, but I just feel very mildly uncomfortable. But it's something that I can't not notice, and I keep feeling weak. I think maybe I've developed some kind of issue, and I'm starting to worry a little bit, but I don't want to call off the trip, so I think that maybe just getting some fresh air is gonna be enough for me. So I start walking. As I'm walking, I realise that I'm really starting to feel better now, and I kind of convinced myself that I'm fine to continue with my trip. It started raining a bit, but luckily I have an umbrella. It was more annoying because I wanted to sit on one of the benches, but it's not really an option now. And there's lots of street lamps ahead of me to guide my way, which kind of look pretty in the rainfall. There's a couple of animals and birds around too, which kind of added to the serenity of it, and I felt really nice here. I didn't want to go too far because I didn't know where I was, and I only see one other person. He's approaching from the other side wearing a long raincoat, and he says, hey. I say hey, and he kind of looks at me funny like I've just swore at him. I kind of laugh to myself and think, oh, they're not too friendly with strangers around here. I decide to loop back round and get to the area where my car is parked, and I just hop in again. I immediately realise that I have to dismiss all of the windows, and it's quite annoying because this has become more of a habit of the last couple of hours of driving that I didn't have before. I think maybe the demisters stopped working and it's quite frustrating. Also something annoying is that some of my things has moved. They've clearly fell down, but it's quite frustrating because I can't be bothered to reorganise it all. I don't really think too much of it, and I continue on my way. Now when I set off, I'm careful again because there's a bit of snow around and kind of like, I don't know what you call it, but maybe like dry ice or whatever on the road, so it makes it quite difficult to drive on. There's also that lovely accompanying mist that I'd seen earlier, and I decided that I should just press on, but just drive cautiously. Now I'm probably about halfway to my family's house now, so I'm starting to feel pretty good. I turn on the radio and I'm having a grand old time. Now while I'm driving and listening to the radio, every so often I hear a random word in the radio. It's like it's picking up another station and I keep hearing some weird gibberish. It's actually really frustrating and I'm trying my best to stop it and get a good signal, but I can't seem to. The annoying thing is too, it seems like no matter what song I listen to, this continues. I ended up just turning this off again, but after about 20 minutes I miss the company and I turn it back on. I'm feeling very tired now even though it's midday, so I think maybe I'm not very well and I should just pull over to the side of the road where I can stop for a bit and have a sleep. I put on the radio once again, deciding to ignore the gibberish, and it puts my mind at rest. I fell asleep for probably a good hour or two and I kind of felt like I'd knocked out. When I woke up again I felt absolutely terrible and I'm not really sure why. I thought maybe some of the food I'd eaten or water I drank was a bit dodgy, because it seemed like I've never felt this way before. And it was like it took me a good hour or two to come round again. What was odd too was my radio was off this time, but I was convinced as I left it on. I started to think that maybe I had some kind of bad flu or something, and I really need to get over to the family just in case I'm not well so they can maybe look after me. And once again I set off. Now at this point, I was driving in the rain and the mist once again. The mist was becoming a common theme and actually was kind of a normal now. Again, it made driving very dangerous and I couldn't really see much further ahead of me than maybe just around one corner or two if they were approaching quite soon. While I was driving, I once again get the feeling that something's wrong and that I need to pull over, and that's exactly what I do. I find another rest stop that isn't actually too bad this time and seems much more modern. I go in there and I go and get some painkillers and some other medical stuff. I get some healthy food this time and I start talking to the person on the cashier. They say, "Yeah, how are you doing?" and all of that. I explain not too bad and that I'm starting to feel unwell, when suddenly they look at me square in the eyes and pull out a gun from behind the register. I immediately put my hands up and freeze, and they scream, "Don't move." And of course I don't. I've never been in a hold-up situation before, but my god, it's a horrible feeling and situation to be in. I then see that the cashier's attention goes beyond me just to my left. I once again don't move and he opens the door. Confused, I lower my hands a bit and slowly follow outside, thinking maybe he wants to take me as a hostage. That's when I can see somebody dressed in all black slowly disappearing off into the tree line. The cashier is literally screaming at the guy over the rain, but this person just sprints off, laughing into the woods. He then turns around and says to me, "Are you okay? Are you okay? I just saw that guy come out of the boot of your car." I scream, "What?" I say, "How? It's not possible. I was on my own in there." He says, "I literally saw him climbing out and going towards the back of the car with something in his hands." It then suddenly hits me. Somebody must have been in the boot of my car for God knows how long, for whatever reason that I really don't want to know, and must have been waiting there for a while to do who knows what to me. What really spooked me out is the fact that I realise now that that must have been the reason that my windows were messing up so much, and I'm very convinced that they'd drugged me or something, and that was why I was feeling so bad. I very quickly made a police report, and the owner was very nice and waited with me for a while, but I said I had to get going now. We checked around my car again with a gun and was certain he was gone, and the cashier said, "God, I'd love to put one in him if he comes back again," and I agreed and drove off, thanking him profusely. I actually offered him money for helping, but he completely refused and said he'd help with the police statement too. Now, when I set out on the road, I felt so different. I felt absolutely violated in a way that I've never felt before. After driving through more rain and mist, I eventually made it to the family's house I was staying with. I apologised to them for being a little late, but for some reason I just couldn't bring myself to explain what happened to them. I did make contact with the police to fill out a report, but of course they couldn't find anything. I still don't know what that person was doing to this day, or what would have happened if the cashier hadn't have intervened or seen the guy, but I really don't like thinking about it. Honestly, it still gives me nightmares to this day. So this encounter happened many years ago when I was very young. It was in 2001 or 2, and I was 11 to 12 at the time. My uncle was interested in purchasing some land near Red Oak, Oklahoma. I do not know exactly where, but it was several acres in a very remote area. My father, mother and myself dedicated and decided to accompany her one Saturday afternoon to scope out the property. From our home, it was a little more than a 3-hour drive, but we all loved riding in the car, so it was not going to be the most eventful road trip, and we just went to get out of the house. Upon arrival, I remembered being very underwhelmed by the place. No houses nearby, and hardly any other signs of life apart from a few birds and the wooded area that wasn't exactly what I would say was picturesque. Still, we parked our car off the road and go exploring the woods a little. My uncle was talking about buying land for hunting. It's not really my cup of tea. As we walked through the woods, it was a very nice day, but something felt off. Everyone in the group remarked about the eerie feeling, but my dad and uncle seemed to laugh it off. My mum had goosebumps and kept looking over her shoulder, which made me on edge too. She's very insistent that it was weird and she wanted to leave, saying it felt as though she's being watched. After a bit of hiking, I started noticing that there was a small red building. I've seen bigger storage sheds in the shrubs, but it looks well built. My uncle said there was nothing about it on the listing, and that was rather odd. So we went inside and realised the doors open, and inside were opened cans of food, a ratty blanket on the floor, and it stunk like nothing I'd ever smelt before. Following this discovery, we all agreed it would be best to get back to the car if there were some crazy hermits living in the woods, and we didn't want to be around to find them. Only issue, we had walked pretty far into the woods and now weren't exactly sure which direction is correct. The eerie feeling really amped up when we were all on edge. We ended up trekking another mile before we finally found the road. But we were further down now from where we parked the car, but could at least follow the road. We walked along the road and we come across an unsettling sight. Right in the middle of the asphalt was a dark grey cat on fire. I had no idea why the cat was on the middle of the road or how this happened, but there was no one else in sight. Naturally, we ran the rest of the way to the car and there was a huge scratch in all the paint down the side from the hood to the trunk. Thankfully, this is the only damage, and my dad was able to start it without any trouble and drove away fine, as fast as we possibly can. My heart just sped up recounting this. Needless to say, my uncle did not buy the land, as you can imagine, and I'm really always going to remember this terrifying encounter, but like any other time, I sort of pushed it to the back of my mind, and it just become one of those It's just one of those moments that you occasionally retell at the family get-togethers. Now back in 2016, I made a road trip from Phoenix, Arizona to Estes Park, CO to camp with friends. I was driving solo and saw pictures of a place that was called Coal Mine Canyon that was on a Navajo reservation. It looked like a neat and secluded place, so I put it into my Apple map and headed there. I got off of the highway while in Tuba City and drove about 15 miles to where I'd turn off the canyon. I thought it was weird that there weren't any signs, and Apple Maps directed me to turn off the road onto a one-lane dirt road. A mile or so when I got into the trip, I ended up at a point where the road descends to about a 10 or 15 degree gradient, down maybe 150 feet into a canyon. It wasn't until I got to the bottom that I realized how steep that was, and also, it was very muddy at the bottom, but I continued on. Every minute further I went, I started to realize that I was in the wrong place. But the road was narrow and had thick desert bushes on either side of it, so it's not really possible to turn around. To make matters worse, I didn't have service and nobody knew I was there. Finally, I got to the end of the road, which was a point that stood another 200 feet above a valley that had a very creepy shack built in there. There was something about that shack that didn't sit right with me. While it was a nice spot, it was very desolate and gave me bad vibes. The scenery was pretty good, so I get out to take a picture, and on my way back to my car, I noticed there was a person looking at me through the window/opening in the shack. It was far enough away that I didn't see any features or expressions, but they're just staring at me. I booked it to my car, turned around and headed back. As I was approaching the 10 to 15 degree grade, I noticed a big truck just sitting at the top there, and my heart sank. It wasn't there before when I was on my way down. When I got close to the hill, the truck started to drive down it, which meant that I had no other way to get out, as I don't have enough room to get around it and I can't go into the bushes. So now the truck and I slowly made our way closer to each other as I scanned for places to get off the road and out of their way. No luck. We stopped about 30 feet away from each other and I noticed there was 3 men in trucks in front of me staring. I gave a little wave and they didn't do anything back. At this point I had no idea what to do and thought I was gonna die. I was trespassing on their property and the person in the shack must have notified them. I don't know if it was 30 minutes or seconds, but to my surprise, the truck pulled off the path suddenly and into the bushes. I slowly moved past while doing so, looking at them. I can see 6 eyes expressionless staring at me. I got to the muddy area at the base of the hill. Wasn't sure I'd be able to get enough speed and traction through the mud to make it up the hill. I straightened my tires, brought the pedal quickly down and shot up the hill. When I got off the dirt road, I gunned it into Tuba City and out of there as fast as I could. Sometimes when I look back, I get a weird feeling in my stomach thinking about what could have happened to me. I was camping at Joshua Tree in the Black Rock campgrounds on the night of the 23rd of July 2018. I'm not from the USA and had flown in to do a Western USA road trip in a motorhome, some of it alone, some with a friend in Joshua Tree. But here I was alone. Anyway, to get to the Joshua Tree campground in late afternoon, there's a very intense heat wave at this time, so it was almost empty. Now, maybe around 1 or 2 other groups camped in there, but there was no rangers because it's off season. Now this campground isn't very far from civilization, maybe a 10-minute drive, but it felt like the middle of nowhere to me, especially being so empty. Naively, I chose the most isolated lot at the back of the grounds because it's close to natural desert plants and jackrabbits and things like that. But it backed right onto where the wilderness began. Before sunset, it felt so nice and peaceful, and I wandered around taking pictures on a hill by my van. After dark, being a very lone young woman, and being my first time camping alone, I found it hard to sleep. I held my pocket knife and pepper spray in my hand and drifted in and out of sleep, but I kept having these very realistic nightmares of somebody knocking on and attacking my van. Eventually I gave up on the idea of sleep for a while and stared out the camper van window, messaging my family back home and looking out for the sky. All of a sudden, about 6 bright golden lights appear in the sky. They look kind of like fireworks, and they burst out, but instead they just kind of surrender there, suspended in the air, like in a half moon formation, very high up. And then the lights went out, and another appeared far off in the distance, hanging out for a couple of seconds before disappearing too. Now, I'm not a strong believer in otherworldly occurrences, but I don't not believe in them either. I googled to see if there was any astrological event that may have explained it, but couldn't find anything. Also, these lights weren't moving in any direction like a meteor or shooting star. They were just hanging, suspended. I'd love to know if anybody had an explanation for them. It was early spring 2016. I just turned 24 years old. My friend and I reached our main spot to camp, the Black Canyon Ring campgrounds just outside of Payson, AZ. We'd usually travel out here 2 or 3 times each year. There were some incredible views, and it's only a couple of hours away from the city. For the most part, this is pretty secluded. It's a privately owned convenience store that's around a few miles away, with a small town 20 miles before that. The entrance is on a dirt road directly off of the highway, with a campground sign at the start of the road, marking local wildlife, any fire hazards, and general news related to camping folk. The paving is mostly linear, with maybe one fork spanning several miles. We once travelled down the dirt road to see how far it would take us. One of the paths would take you to another highway entrance with a ranger's tower halfway there. The other led to a dead-ended area. There's an abandoned cabin which can be found on this path a few miles in, mostly hidden off in the distance behind some larger foliage. The snow had mostly cleared off at this point, leaving a crisp air, a slight chill, and fauna becoming active again. We'd usually spot some wild horses, several deer, and tons of little critters whenever we come out this way. It was really the perfect time of year to be out here if you really wanted a relaxing trip away from the city for a couple of days. So we get in at around 4 PM on a Tuesday roughly. It was late for us. We'd usually try and make it out there by noon at least. The trip was pretty spontaneous. We both had work during the coming weekend and decided to just go for it. The sun was closing in on us pretty fast and we hadn't picked somewhere to camp. There was maybe 2 other groups, both families parked somewhere close to the entrance, only a few hundred yards away from the highway. This time around, we just wanted to get away from humans for a while. Customer service jobs will do that. So we drive down the dirt road past our usual spot and pick the perfect area, which is a small clearing just off the edge of the hill. The whole valley could be seen from this area with a really beautiful sunset. This would have been our main spot from then on if the next night's incident hadn't happened, that is. We agreed to get a campfire going and decide that we're going to avoid building a tent this trip. We didn't have much time to do so anyway, and her car wasn't that uncomfortable. I'd sleep in the back seat and she'd sleep in the passenger seat, with the windows slightly ajar. We'd each have a blanket with us and would fall into a slumber. The next day went fairly uneventful and we just decompressed. I had this strange feeling throughout the day though, like I was being watched. There was the crunching of leaves just out of sight every few hours, but I figured that it was just the local wildlife doing their thing. My friend didn't notice anything weird too, so we don't really dwell on it. Night came, and the feeling still hasn't gone far. My friend felt something but doesn't vocalize it, and she took some sleeping pills. She didn't usually take them on trips, but thought she needed it this night. It's now nearing 1 AM and my friend dozed off in the passenger seat while I was attempting to wind down in the back. I lean against the window behind the passenger seat, legs outstretched. Now the window opposite of me was rolled down slightly, letting in a breeze. I've been on my phone scrolling through Facebook or whatever, and I hear something outside, a few crunches on the leaves, several paces outside of the car. I whispered to my friend, "Did you hear that?" But she's already out of it. I put my phone down and listened for a few minutes. It's probably just an animal, I think. I went back to my phone, scrolling through social media, and about 10 minutes have passed when I hear it again, crunch, right outside the door. I lowered the phone. My eyes took a moment to adjust from the light of the phone, and I looked deep into the dark of the woods. As I turned the phone away from me with the backlight illuminating the window, I see two dirty, scrabbled hands against the window, the fingers wrapped inside, with the nails being disgusting, behind the window, and then there's a silhouette of a face pressed up against it. The breath would create condensation a couple of seconds at a time. All I can make out is a reflection of those empty black eyes. I couldn't move. I can't scream. I felt like eternity. The staring contest between me and this thing was really impressive. And I think, why haven't I run away? Why haven't they run away? Is this the face of death? Is this it? After probably 10 seconds of not doing anything, the hands slowly unclench from the windows and recede into darkness. The condensation on the window dispersed. Another couple of seconds passed before I hear crunch, 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 kind of fading off into the distance. I'm still sat there thinking, what happened? Why am I not doing anything? An adrenaline shot into my body. I pounded my friend's seat, waking her up from her slumber into dizzy confusion in a haze. I unlatched the window and kicked the door open, and I took a moment to scan the area. Whoever they were, whatever it was, is gone. I scrambled to pick up any important camping supplies we left outside, and just crammed everything into the back seat and the trunk, periodically looking over my shoulder, listening for those footsteps. I quickly slammed the door shut, and there's a grim reminder of the horror that's just happened. There's two handprints imprinted on the window. I quickly wiped them off in a panic, trying to ease the situation, I guess. I jump into the front seat and started the car and floored it. My friend finally comes to and says, "What the hell are you doing?" I say, "We have to go. There's somebody out there." I didn't see whatever or whoever it was while fleeing the scene, but I sped down a dirt road, and I know my friend insisted I slowed down. We eventually reached a highway, and I proceeded to drive 20 or so miles before reaching a Denny's, when my friend asked me to stop and explain what happened and eat. The nightmare was subsided a few months later. My embarrassment continues to the day, and the shock and horror of it all. So this happened to my girlfriend last night. We'd been camping for 4 days, and were planning on leaving on the 5th, but my girlfriend had to leave the night before because of work. I told her to drive safe because I was pretty worried about her hitting a deer. She drives a little Volkswagen Bug, so I knew if it hit, it wouldn't go very well. Anyway, around 45 minutes later, she shot me a call and told me something about what's happened while she was driving. She was driving down a stretch of road with no side roads going off, just forest. She said she saw headlights pop up behind her vehicle, which was odd enough since there were no roads to turn off of. Even more odd, the headlights drove up to 60 miles per hour and caught up with her within about 4 seconds. She said that she was listening to a song that had a countdown, so that's how she could tell. Now, she was a little sketched out, so she sped up a bit, but it kept following her. The headlights pulled up next to her, but she didn't see a car, but a silhouette of somebody running. She slammed on her brakes and went to turn around, and then realizes that there's 20 headlights following her before veering off into the forest. She sped back up again to the part of the woods trying to escape it and doesn't see anything. Now this really freaked her out to the point that she wanted to stop talking about it. She said her dad had a similar experience and said it could be a skinwalker. I've never really believed in that kind of thing, but I don't know what it could have been. It was almost like whatever this was pretending to be a car. So I was in the VA/MD area and had a lot of work related to sites ranging from downtown Baltimore to Virginia Beach and all around. Friday's wrapped up, and I hit the road to some social arrangements I made for the weekend. I spent the weekend with friends out in various parts of VA, got dragged off to other places, and even went further out. Just the usual weekend fun times. It was late Sunday night when I had to leave, or I'm not going to be able to get back home in time for my start, which was thankfully late afternoon on Monday. I'm fully rested and I don't do any drinking. I'm not into drugs. Now on the highway at about 3 AM, in the middle of God knows where, between Roanoke and DC, there's absolutely nobody around. I'm cruising along in the left lane simply because nobody else is around. No headlights on for the past hour or so, no taillights either, no road lamps. It's dark, really dark and foggy, but I have my music up and I feel fine. And then, I just happened to look to the left and there is a dog barking at me, a German Shepherd in a car passenger seat, somewhat blue glow from the instruments of the car, and it's got its face to the window and it's barking its head off at me. I get a good hard look at it too, because at first my brain is registering that maybe it's a cop car. I was going a little bit quick at the time, and the dog and the instruments just suddenly come in and I have to check again. I then put my foot on the brake and start slowing down, but it's hard to pull over. I even put on my blinker and start shifting lanes and pull over to the right because, wait, there's no left shoulder on this road. I look back to my left, where there is still no shoulder/room for another car, and it's just gone. No trace of it. I slammed on my brakes and stopped in the middle of nowhere, flipped on my light bars, and even look around with my handheld spotlight and there's nothing. No tail lights, no headlights, no engine sound, nothing. There's no tyre marks even. Now my vehicle had great visibility and lots of extra lightings, off-road SUV with the trimmings and there is no possible way somebody pulled a sneaky on me, so I really don't know what happened. It's been a while since we did a road trip across the western US, April/May this year. On our journey, we come across the Hashda Trinity National Forest as we're heading back to the west coast, literally in the middle of nowhere. I asked my boyfriend to stop along the highway as I needed to go for a pee in the woods. I jumped out of the car and searched for a place where I could do that. Meanwhile, my boyfriend was waiting inside, leaving the car windows open. As I'm concentrated on not peeing on my shoes, I don't really realise what's happening around me and went back about 3 minutes later. As I approached the car, I noticed my boyfriend kind of alert. I sat down on the passenger seat as he locks the doors, turned to me, said in a really serious way, "Did you notice it?" I said, "What?" "Didn't you notice there's not a single sound in the forest? No bird sounds, no clickings, no leaves falling or anything. Like the whole world just stopped." We closed the windows and continued the journey without incident. Although it's been a while since we were there, and we're back home in Europe now, this experience kind of stuck in my mind because it's not what we're used to in North America or in the wilderness there. I don't know, there was something specially eerie about the fact that everything was being absorbed sound-wise, and I've never really experienced anything like it before, and I've often heard it's a sign that something bad's about to happen. Now my dad is a trucker, and in the summers I tag along with him. One evening we're driving from Houston to Jacksonville, and somehow we got turned around on the back roads of Louisiana. The last major place I remembered us being in was Troy. It's about 1 AM. Well, it was almost 3 and we have no idea where we are. We eventually come up to this little town. It had one broken spotlight, a diner, an abandoned factory and some empty shopping centres. In total it was maybe 4 blocks from one another. We were both hungry, and because we didn't want to wait to go to a truck stop, we pulled in behind the diner. Now that I think about it, the fact that a small town diner was open at 3 AM should have been a sign really that something was amiss. We get in, and this diner is pretty nice. Actually, it's a bit old school, reminiscent of the 60s. There's a single waitress on duty and a copy in a booth. We naturally all got chatting. I remembered the meal so clearly because it was the first time I had grits. They were loaded with cheese and bacon. The cop gave us directions back to the highway and bought me a chocolate milk for the road. I even remember the tables. They were covered in wood and polka dot patterns. Well, eventually I made it back to civilization, and later that morning at a stop, my dad said to me about the town. He knew a lot of confused local truckers. He was sure he was getting the name right, but nobody heard of it. A few months later, as he was driving me back to Texas, he drove through Louisiana attempting to locate the town, but we can never find it. We're still not sure what happened, if we drove through a ghost town that nobody remembered or something weirder, but I really don't know what to think of this. Now, I'm not really a long-haul trucker by trade, but back in the day, I had several odd jobs that required I drive across the country. One was shipping horses. I drove the truck from barns to shows or vice versa, and the other way was working as a road crew for a rock band. I was very, very young, 16 to 20 years old. For reference, I'm a female, short, athletic. Deaf the odd one out at a lot of rest stops and gas stations along the major routes. I'm also / was tatted and had a red mohawk which made me stand out more. Several things happened to me that I remember, but I want to say Navajo Nation is really, really creepy and always drove through at night. Never meant to plan it that way, but that's always what happened. Other creepy place is northern Utah. Totally hills have eyes up there. But here's story 1. I was driving from Glavestone, Texas to New Orleans, LA. Glavestone had just been hit by the hurricane, and there was a weird serial killer moving through that city, so the vibe had already begun as weird. Just as I crossed the border from Texas to LA, I started to get super tired. It was really late, 3 AM-ish. Tried to find a gas station to pull over, rest up and fill up, but all of them were shut. Gave up, pulled into the next one which was closed, parked in the far corner of the lot, killed my car, and laid my seat back to sleep. Everything seems quiet. There were a few lights on from the station that are on 24/7, but I parked far enough away that they couldn't have really bothered me. I woke up with a start. Had been dreaming, but I had this gut instinct to wake up. I immediately saw somebody covered in mud, wearing rags, holding a knife, advancing slowly towards my car. He was maybe 5 feet away, moving forward. My adrenaline kicked in immediately and I switched the car on. At that point, he lets out some guttural growl and launches towards the car as I'm backing up. I barely miss him and he's grabbing at the vehicle. With the headlights on, I could see he's covered in sores and the knife was all rusty. I sped out of there, didn't sleep again all the way up to NOLA. Freaked me out so badly. I also never slept in my car. The idea that he could have been waiting for me to sleep for how long I don't know really scares me. And my car's also convertible, so he could have easily cut through. Imagine waking up to somebody crazy advancing with a knife. I mean, it's given me nightmares for years. Now, second story. I was hauling horses from Kansas to Tucson, Arizona, driving a big Ford truck, a dolly, with a small trailer carrying 3 horses near Gallup. Around 2 AM, the back inner tire on the passenger side blew up. I pulled off to the road and assessed the situation. There was zero chance I could change the tire myself given the trailer/dolly truck situation, and I'm tired and weak from exhaustion, so I call a tow company and try to find a temporary boarding place for the horses. It's the morning of Easter Sunday, so literally no one's open. I'm going through the yellow pages calling tow company after tow company. Finally, I find a Native American tow company who has also got a ranch with boarding for horses and a truck to come and grab the trailer. It was a godsend. But the guy and his wife who ran the company told me be very careful not to leave my truck during the 2-hour drive and that they would take it. They said this in such an emphatic way that I got really scared. They told me not to open the door for anyone and keep the doors locked. No one was really on the road, so I was confused as to who could be out there as a threat, but I took it seriously and did so. I kept hearing this weird scratching sound on the back panel of the truck, like somebody was trying to open the small window back there. A couple of times the truck would sway, which I figure is the horses. It was pitch black out with no wind. I heard a couple of footsteps, but I chalk it up to my imagination or the wind. It was getting scary now, and I couldn't move. Eventually the nice couple with the tow truck and other truck come to haul up the ponies. Immediately, they move me from my cabin to the cabin of their tow truck, tell me not to move or open up the door in any circumstances. The couple is super fast. Lady deals with the horses and the man gets my truck up on the tow bed. They then drive me to the ranch. After the man drops my truck off at a local shop owned by his cousin, who says he will handle the flat on Monday. Anyway, long story short, this wonderful couple takes care of me and the horses and gets my truck fixed. As I'm ready to leave on Monday afternoon, there's a story on the local news station of a woman with a flat tire who was murdered alongside the same stretch of highway on Sunday evening. She'd been out changing a tire and looks like somebody murdered her. I asked the couple about this and they don't say much other than time to time it happens and said it's certain death there. They also gave me some bags of stuff to have / burn in the back of my cabin for protection. I felt very lucky to find these people, to be honest. They definitely looked out for me and I didn't feel unsafe staying at their home. Now, I don't live in America, I live in Scandinavia, and this story happened a couple of years ago and it's something I'd like to share with everyone today. Now, I was driving to a relatively remote area where I had some family. I was quite excited to see them because I haven't seen them for a number of years. Now, this was in the winter time, so there was snow absolutely everywhere, and it made driving quite difficult, to be honest. Don't worry, from where I'm from this is normal, so I kind of got used to it, and I set off. Now, I'd only have to drive for just under a day, which isn't too bad really, but I set out very early in the morning, aiming to arrive near the night time, which in hindsight probably wasn't the best idea because if anything went wrong with my car, I'd be in a big problem, but it didn't happen entirely, so luckily for me things went relatively okay. Now, the first part of the drive-in is completely normal and I feel really good and everything's how it should be. I eventually make it to roughly the midway point and I'm driving through the forest now. There's not really much of a path, so I have to be quite careful. There's still some light snowfall and it's very cold outside, but I have some music playing and I'm feeling pretty good at the time. As I'm driving, there's occasional rockfall from the side of the road that I have to be very careful with because these things are really killers if you're not careful. Now, one thing that I noticed was strange is every time I seemed to look off to the side of the road, my eyes had a really hard time adjusting to what I was seeing. It was almost like my vision would shift for a little bit then go back to normal, but I wasn't too bothered by that. I was just more worried about the big rocks and things. Now, as I'm driving, I realised that the rocks are becoming more and more frequent, almost like they're placed in the middle of the road. I remember there was one particularly bad one that I actually had to get out and find a big stick to kind of lever it out of the way. It's one I couldn't have moved without the stick, and I was really glad that it actually held up to the task. Upon getting outside, I realised there was a really strange stench that I hadn't smelt before, and it seemed to follow me everywhere I went. Even when I jumped back in my car, it was like I couldn't get the smell off of me. I would roll the windows down every so often to try and get rid of it, but to be honest, it didn't really make much of a difference. I remembered coming up to a junction and my car kind of slid for a couple of seconds. Luckily my car was a bit of a beast and handled it quite well, but it was really worrying, to be honest. I had to drive much slower this time. Now, staring down the road, I couldn't really see too far ahead of me because of the bends in the woods, but I knew I was going the right way. A quick glance at my phone would confirm that. Now, while my tyres were struggling in the snow, I heard a strange low rumble sound outside. Thinking something was wrong with my car, I quickly pull over to the side of the road to have a listen. I lean over the hood of my car when something large falls near me. I look, and another rock has slid off the side again, somewhat obstructing me. I think this is really weird. I go to move it and I hear the same sound again. It's quite a powerful sound, and it's like nothing I've ever really heard before. Thinking maybe it's a large rock about to fall, I quickly get back in my car and make my way on once again. Now, I kind of got used to the smell now because I didn't really notice it, or maybe there wasn't much of it around, so I'm pretty content as I continue driving. Now, the trees around me are quite tall and almost needle-like. If you look in any particular direction, you can only see far enough before one of the trees blocks your vision, so you kind of feel like you're in an infinity pool of trees. It can be good or bad, but for me it was kind of neither. Now, while driving, I seem to get a strange feeling that something's off. Now, I end up coming to a particular area where something just feels like I'm not alone and I can't describe it. I decide once again to get out of my car. I can just about make out a jogger off to the side of the road wearing some white snowsuit. And I think this is bizarre because how on earth they could have got here, I don't know. But thinking maybe they're in trouble, I quickly hop in the car again and slowly make my way up around a hill to where they should be parked. But strangely, I can't see any tracks at all. I decide the best thing to do is just keep going and try and find somebody. At this slow pace, 5 minutes later I still don't encounter anyone, so I just presume that probably it was in my head and nobody's actually there. I don't know whether you can imagine things from seeing so much white from the snow, or the trees becoming so similar to each other, but maybe that's what I was experiencing. Maybe I was dehydrated. I went to swig some more of my water, but I realised that I drank a lot, and it was unlikely that either of those things were causing it. I come up to another corner, and again there's another rock in the road, and I realise something's off. I come up to a point where I can either go to the left path or right path. Now, the left will lead me the right way, but I'm just so curious as to what's made me stop this time, so I get out. Now, when I get out, curiosity gets the better of me, and I want to see how this rock got here because there's no way it slid down. I decide to move off to the side of the road, and that's when I'm hit with the smell once again. Now, I don't exactly know what it was, but I had a feeling it wasn't a jogger with me. And yeah, where is he? I decide to look around again when the smell becomes absolutely overpowering. And I can just about make something out, moving across the tree line. Now, this thing or person was moving impossibly quick. It looked like the jogger again, but this time much taller. And the ground was moving a little bit as they did. And the stench was disgusting. I've realised something's gravely wrong now, and I start sprinting. I ended up stumbling initially, but quickly steadying myself again on a tree. I actually pierce a hole in my coat and I'm bleeding a little bit. I quickly make my way back into my car and slam the door. I press the ignition and it doesn't work. I swear and punch the wheel. And as I do that, the horn goes off, and it's extremely loud. Then I can just about make out whatever this figure is sprinting off now in the other direction. I roll down the window just to hear if there's anything, and there's silence. There's just snow falling onto my arm as it's out the window, and I can see that thing fade off. I then go to start the engine again, and as it roars into life, there's a horrifying sound which sounds like a very deep guttural growl. Again, like nothing I've ever heard before. That was my cue to get out of there. I rolled up the window and quickly set off on the left path. I'm driving very quickly, to be honest, considering the conditions, but I just about make it. I end up coming onto a main road again, and I basically sped the rest of the way to the family's house. Now, nothing else unusual happened on that trip, but I don't really want to say I believe in some of the Nordic urban legends or any of those other things, but I don't know what it could have possibly been. It could have easily been somebody out there, but I don't know. Something about what I'd experienced that day was really off. I'll leave it for you guys to decide what you think it is, but I haven't really made up my mind as to what happened to me that day. I'm a long-haul truck driver, and I've seen a couple of weird things that I couldn't really explain. However, there was one which really takes the crown as being the weirdest, and I think you'll understand why. So I've been doing quite a long drive across state actually, and I was relatively tired of the drive. I needed to rest, so I quickly find a gas station which I can pull over into, and ask if I can park in the back and just shut my eyes for a while, which they agreed. Waking up, I'm feeling far more refreshed now, and I set off again. I don't make it too much further before eventually I see somebody at the side of the road. They seem like they're in a lot of trouble, and I stop to help. Now they're crouching over like they're injured, but when they turn, they're wearing a clown full mask. Now, as I stop, I do the window up quickly, realizing something's wrong. I look in the rearview mirror and I suddenly realize that there are more people moving behind, at least 3 of them. And then, somebody else pops up holding something in the road. I kid you not, there's somebody standing dressed as a clown in the middle of the road, holding something that looks pointy. I immediately ram onto the accelerator and I aim right for this person. I'm kind of ashamed to admit it, but I don't care if they got hurt at this point. They quickly jump over to the side of the road and I speed off as quick as I can in my truck. I look again behind just to see if they're following me, and I see a group of 5 people all dressed pretty much the same standing there. They then begin to wave me off as I drive off into the distance. I then drove for a good 5 hours almost without stopping, until eventually I make it to another big rest stop where I pass out. I still don't know who they were to this day, or whether I was targeted specifically, but my god did it scare the life out of me. Last year, I was out in Colorado exploring campsites near Boulder. Got into camp around 10 PM, accompanied by a few flurries, no problem. I grew up in New England winters, so it didn't really make a difference for me. But I also wasn't having a fire due to the restrictions, so I got my SUV ready for sleep and got cozy with some Netflix. I was about to drift off to sleep when I hear something outside. Now, I'm used to the vulnerability of camping and various sounds at night. This was, and still is, unexplainable to me. Now, I hear crying, really disturbing crying, which seemed close to my car. For reference, this road has a bunch of random dispersed camp spots, but none of which I'm too close to or have ever heard crying, and I shouldn't be close enough to hear that. I mute my Netflix and stay alert. The crying slurs into higher pitched laughter, and then slurs into low pitched laughter. Now, it's hard to exactly say what it was, but it sounded like almost laughter but crying. I think, God, what? The cry laughing was not like a hyena and had a distinctive human quality to it. Now, this was definitely bizarre, to say the very least. Now, I've overheard some hikers talking, but this was different. Maybe they were cry laughing. This actually scared me more than an animal. I've seen moose before, and for the record, the campsite had a lookout, and I don't know, they never spotted any here. So, back to my situation. The cry laughter moved and increased in frequency. Now it's getting quite weird. What I mean by this is that it cry laughed to the right of me, then cry laughed near the back of the car, then impossibly far out and back again. No way a person or animal could have moved so quickly without shuffling noises. It was almost surreal sounding. Now, hearing wildly unfamiliar weepings and sounds is really the stuff of nightmares for me. Now, the weeping seemed to be disembodied, and I was freaked. I told to myself, breathe like you know how to. You've got to move. I had a thought that maybe there was somebody living in the brush out there who'd lost it. Only came out past 10 PM in snow, and pranced around cry laughing with a rock outside the car waiting to smash into the window as soon as I looked out, but that seems unlikely. I was nearly froze, but heard that breathing. I really managed to get myself to move a little bit and think, and especially forcing my own breathing helped with that. I double locked my car doors, hoping that the beep would alert the intruder that I was awake and unhappy. I got out from my sleeping bag, even though I feared the movement would be sensed, and hopped into the driver's seat. I wanted to vomit, breathe, but turned the car on, the headlights and the brights. Then I took down the sun visor covering the windshield only partially to see my moose friend on the opposite side of the road, munching away at veg. Okay, are the weeping sounds coming from the moose? I'm not convinced, especially not because it's eating. Now, it took about 5 minutes to get to the end of the road, and I parked before hitting the main road to collect myself. I realised I left my propane. It was like $9 and I didn't want to waste it, so I took another deep breath. I decided to head back and survey the area. Certainly, I'd be able to catch anyone crouched in the bushes if it was a person, and I could just drive away. I had my headlamp and the brights on when I drove to the campsite, again taking a deep breath. I jumped out of the car to grab the propane and claim the space or stand my ground, that type of thing. But nothing. I can't explain it, so the stand my ground energy was short-lived. It's after 11 at this point and I'm just tired and uneasy now, so I'm out, onto a backup spot, and of course it's hard to claim down. All I've got as a possible explanation is a super calm moose started making the sounds, but I don't buy it. I really don't know what this could have been, or whether it's a crazy demented person out of there, but what's really bizarre is the way that the sound moved away so quickly and then reappeared again, impossibly quick. Now in 2017, one of my good friends who lived in Portland, OR, was offered a new job in Long Island, New York, and took it. He asked me to fly out so I could road trip with him across the country so he wouldn't have to be alone. Of course I agreed. I flew out from JFK to PDX. We have many stories from this road trip, but none stranger than what happened to us in Ohio. After a few days on the road, we had entered Ohio. I wish I remembered exactly where this took place, but honestly I don't recall. All I know is that it was past Zanesville, heading east. My buddy was driving. As I was reaching towards the ground trying to grab my phone that I had dropped, he suddenly said, "This old lady next to us keeps pointing at me. I think she wants me to pull over." I was always paranoid and saying, no, keep driving. But he pulled over. A black Escalade with plates from Alaska pulled over in front of us. Out comes this lady who's no younger than 60 saying, I'm glad I got to you boys when I did. Your tyres are smoking. Now, it's important to note that we're towing his Camry with U-Haul that we're in. Side note, this happened in Sandsville. Now, we got stuck in the parking lot. Couldn't have found any backup, so had to rehitch his car. We realised later that he left the emergency brake on. Anyway, after she said this, we looked at each other completely puzzled and immediately turned to the tyres. They were absolutely smoking, like they had bullet holes in them. Now this is where it gets weird. Not even a few seconds after, we kneeled down to inspect the tyres and she was gone. No goodbye and no sound of the car. Just vanished. The whole interaction of her getting out of the car couldn't have been more than 15 seconds. I didn't have a doubt in my mind she had vanished, and I looked at my friend and he was very pale, confirming what I was thinking. I don't know for sure what could have happened if we didn't stop. I don't know if the car would have caught fire or something, but I'm not sure if she was an angel sent there to protect us. But the whole situation was very bizarre. Working as a ranger, you always get the odd thing you can't explain, but sometimes they really go beyond the ordinary and into depths that I don't even know. There was one particular thing that we were doing for training where that we all stayed in the same little bedroom together pretty much. I guess it was like group bonding, and we were split into different groups, but mine had 2 other people in it, and we're kind of in like bunk beds, but they're more spread out than bunk beds. What was beautiful about this particular one is that you could actually see through the ceiling. They had kind of like a clear plastic sheet at the top, which was actually really nice, and if it wasn't rainy, you'd have a really good view of the stars and things like that. The window wasn't too wide, just really long and went all the way across, I guess to create natural light or something, but it was beautiful for stargazing. Now on the second day as I'm laying there, half asleep, I suddenly jolt awake and realise what I'm looking at's wrong. I can see somebody staring at me. I scream to wake up the other guys and say, look, do you see that? And then, one of my ranger friends jumps out of bed and stands up, and the other does the same and I bolt up. We literally see somebody dressed in Victorian clothes floating slowly across from one side of the screen to the other without making a sound, literally floating. I don't see how anybody else could have done this because they should have surely fell through. And why were they floating? Even if it was somebody using a tree and a cable, there's no way they could have glided across so perfectly. Now, again, I'm not probably the most brave ranger, but I literally screamed. I flicked on the lights and this woke up all the other rangers in the nearby cabin things they were staying in. They all come over, and they could tell something was wrong immediately by the expressions on our face. We then started explaining what had happened, and I can see one of them roll their eyes and all the others go back to bed. That left all of us in our cabin remaining just staring at each other. As you can imagine, we didn't sleep well that night, and luckily for us it was the last day we had to be there, and I was sure glad that that was the case. I still get spooked out thinking about it to this day. Now back in the mid-80s, we were driving through Tennessee on our way to visit friends in Texas. My mum was driving. I, a teenager, was navigating by using a paper map. These were the days before cell phones and GPS. We made it past Nashville on the I-40 pretty late at night. We're maybe an hour outside of the city. I'm charting our progress, old school pencil and paper. We pass an exit, mark it. A minute later, a summer thunderstorm hit. Literally all of the visibility has really dropped now to practically zero. All the traffic's gone to a crawl, and we decide to pull off for the next possible exit and find a motel to spend the night, because there's no way we're making significant progress in the storm. Slow white knuckle driving ensues. An exit looms up on the right, no signage we can see in the downpour, and we take it. At the top of the exit ramp, we turn right towards a brilliantly lit up gas station. Left turn was onto an overpass crossing I-40, no lights, from that side of the interstate. On the dinky little road now, to our right is a gas station that we're rapidly passing. To our left and back behind some trees, what appeared to be a hotel, but you couldn't make out much of the signage in the rain. We drove past the gas station before we realised really that the road just ended ahead. The gas station was the only building on this side of the road. It went from 1.5 lane paved to 1 lane gravel to tired dirt track and grass everywhere. Now, we passed the gas station and there's only one turn off from this road. It was on our left. We took it and tried to back up and turn around back to the gas station. Unfortunately, the paved slope of that narrow one-way driveway turned off steeply into a mud pit. No backing up. My mum put the car into a low gear, turned hard, and headed back from the gravel road through the mud. We almost made it out, but we ended up getting mired. The front passenger tyre caught on the corner of an exposed concrete storm drain, maybe 3 feet from the road or so. Now out of the car, into the rain and mud, we walked to the gas station. The place was spotless, super bright, had 2 young men behind the counter. What sounds like one of Elvis's songs playing on the radio. Attendant's first word is, "Do you get stuck in the mud?" And they said it super enthusiastic. I mean, way too enthusiastic. Also, these night clerks were dressed in suits and they appeared to be about 30 years out of date. The whole place is weird. Admitting we gotten stuck, we now asked them, is there a tow company we could call? They pulled out a phone book and started talking to each other. Now, it's not a Nashville phone book, but like some little township. Population couldn't have been more than 100 from the handful of white pages, but the book had dozens of yellow pages of nothing but tow truck companies, like literally hundreds of them for this small town, too small to even appear on a map. Attendants had a friendly debate about whose turn it was to come get the car out of the mud. Decided to skip over the company who was theoretical next because there had been some kind of problem with the last time they were called for a tow. Made a decision on who to call and let my mum use their phone. More weirdness. Creepiness intensifies. Still storming, though less now. The tow truck arrives maybe 15 minutes later. Brilliant white. Not a speck of dirt or mud on it. I've seen vehicles in a new car lot that are actually dirtier. And 2 young men in the truck also dressed nicely when they step out. Freshly polished patent leather shoes without a drop of mud on them. Starched white shirts, paper hats and bow ties. It was definitely weird to see. Now we hike across the street to the next door to the mud pit where the car is stuck. The tow truck guys are horrified. They almost got out of the mud, they say to each other repeatedly. The subtext from their shock tone is clear. No one must have ever escaped the mud pit on their own. These people will have to take some sort of action to make sure nobody else gets as close as we did to escaping. They tow our car out, easy. We get back to the gas station, pay the drivers for their service. Tow truck drivers let gas station attendants know Mum and I almost made it out of the mud on our own. The attendants are horrified and shocked by this. By now, getting huge uncanny, weird vibes from all 4 of these men. And not just them, but the whole place is too clean and brightly lit, and too weirdly out of date. It was surprisingly good for a small town, and it just didn't make sense. Almost perfect, in fact. We are definitely in Creepy Town. If these guys were humans, they were definitely seriously off. If they weren't, they almost had their ordinary human act down to a pat. The tow truck driver drives off, Attendants turn, all friendly again, and ask Mum if we're gonna stay the night in the hotel across the road. They're so excited that we might spend the night there talking about how great it is. My mum and I made non-committal noises, return to the car. I tell Mum we are not staying the night here and she wholeheartedly agrees. The rain is finally letting up. Drive straight out to the interstate. Did not pass go. Did not ever go nearby this creepy old motel again. Drive down the I-40 to the very next exit. It was maybe 5 miles. Pull off, spend the night in a kind of dodgy but ordinary motel. But at least it's not the Bates Motel, we joke. The rest of the trip goes well then. Several days later, on my way home, my mum and I decide that we would really like to see the creepy old town in the daylight again. It couldn't have been more weird than that, could it? Heading back up the I-40, we pass the exit where we actually did spend the night on the way down. Start looking for the exit to the creepy town. Should have been about 5 miles ago, along with an overpass. We get 5 miles down, no pass, no exit, no overpass. 5 more miles before we eventually find the exit off the I-40. It's the one I had marked as being right before the storm first hit. Now, I've travelled many times on the I-40 since, often remarking that, hey, there's the exit where that weird storm should have been. I still don't know where it is to this day, and it almost is like it's just vanished. A long time ago, my brother had an office near the Canadian border in Washington state. I often had to travel over there to help the staff train. Now, being a guy in my late 20s, single, I like to get away for a few days. I also like to make a few extra bucks by volunteering to go wherever there was help needed. I would usually fly up there, but some occasions when I needed to bring equipment or materials down, I would drive. This one particular time was about 17 years ago. We bought a bunch of equipment in a wholesale and needed to deliver this and some other odds and go up to our office in WA state. Of course, everybody knew I'd volunteer for the drive. I was told to drive a box truck up there and leave it and fly back. Prior to this, I would drive a company car or SUV, but no worries, the box truck wasn't that big and probably was about the same size as one of the rental U-Haul trucks. I always preferred to start my driving journey towards the end of the day mostly, because I'm one of those people who likes night driving. For the majority of my journey it's uneventful. I only stopped at gas stations and the occasional rest stop to take care of nature. At some point near the California-Oregon border is when things start to get bad. It was approximately 1 o'clock in the morning and I had stopped at a rest area, probably the last one on the California side. On the far side, I don't remember seeing some truckers or anything, but basically the parking lot was empty. By this point, I wasn't really thinking of anything creepy or out of the ordinary. I got out of my truck, go into the restroom and take care of business. I wash up a bit and take my sweet time stretching my legs, but when I exit the restroom and walk over to my truck, I noticed a vehicle parked next to mine. I was literally like, this whole parking lot and this person pulls up next to me. Oh well, I jump in my truck and continue on the journey. For about another 10 or 20 miles down the freeway, my truck starts acting weird. Some of the interior lights start flickering. I don't really think anything of it. A little while later, all of the lights in the vehicle goes out. I mean interior lights, running lights and headlights. At this point it's about 2 AM and in some weird area of Oregon that I don't know, which is heavily wooded. I can't find a flashlight in the truck cabin. I get so angry, not sure of being scared, to be driving 60 miles an hour in the middle of what seemed like the scene from the Tales of the Dark Side, but I pound my fist on the dashboard and scream. Almost instantly everything come back on. It felt like a frenzy. At the next upcoming rest stop, I decided to pull over again, maybe from adrenaline or that I had to pee. I jumped out of the truck and went to the restroom. although this time I didn't take that long inside the restroom and walk back out of the truck. I remember my thoughts saying that I should stay inside, or at least wait before I attempt to continue at dawn. As I walk up to my truck, I see an older guy, kind of heavyset with grey hair. He's standing next to my truck. I didn't see his vehicle near mine, but just assumed that he was outstretching his legs. As I walk up, he starts a conversation about the weather or something, and a very light snow starts falling, but not the kind of stuff that stays on the ground. I wasn't paying too much attention to him because my first impression is that he's just a lonely old guy that wants to chit chat. Then he said something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. He's looking at my truck and says, you got any mechanical problems? I stopped in my tracks and felt blood rush into my head. I just said no and keep driving, and trying to stay away from him. He then tells me that he doesn't live too far away, and I'm welcome to join him for a hot coffee, and if I need anything, I can even sleep there, on the sofa. That kind of gave me the creeps, but I'm thinking to myself, if I need, I could use this guy. I thought I'm younger and stronger and not afraid to defend myself, so basically the conversation eventually ends with, well, I better get back on the road before the snow starts to really fall. As I'm driving away, I see that he's walking behind the restroom, so I think to myself, what the heck was that about? My mind is racing and retracting my last few steps, and how did this guy know I was having electrical problems with my truck? I suddenly think back to the rest stop in California, and that the car was parked next to the truck. Could he have done something to my wiring while I was taking my sweet time in the John? A few more miles down the road, no new issues with my electrics, but I decide at the next gas station I'm gonna stop. So I pull up to a gas station in Oregon. Now they don't let you pump your own gas, so I have to wait for another attendant and then decide to go in and get a drink. I paid, and as I was waiting for the fueling in my tank, I walk around to the truck and look for signs of tampering up near the front fender, and I see some smears, but not really sure if it's from the road, snow or what. I just tell myself, okay, you're freaking yourself out, so now I just jump in my truck and pull out of the gas station as quick as I can make a turnaround and get back to the side where, on the ramp, I can actually see what's happening. I eventually make it to the exit, and I see a car parked in the corner and somebody sitting inside. I think to myself, I'm just freaking out, seeing shadows in every corner. It's just a few hours until dawn, maybe in the morning. I'm gonna laugh about this. I'm being followed and set up, maybe? Did I interrupt that old guy when I come out of the restroom so fast? Was he actually waiting for the right time and place to kill me? Well, as I continue driving on the snow, it starts to get a little more concerning. I didn't grow up in this area, or one that has a lot of snow, so I'm not too experienced with this, and I know when to look for hazards, however. But I look out of my rearview side mirror and see a pair of headlights trailing behind me, which is odd because most drivers pass up, and this person is following me. I'm already going well under the speed limit, but I drive a bit more slowly to try and let them pass, but they don't go anywhere. At some point, I'm getting closer to a larger city, Portland. It's still dark and snow is slightly falling now. I decide to pull over again and maybe the car will go around. I quickly exit and I make it towards a freeway, and a gas station is not too far away with a patrol car parked over there. I immediately pull up to the cops and get out. This is a lady officer, and I start making conversation with her about the snow and expected conditions. I'm thinking about telling her about the car behind me, but all of a sudden, I felt silly. What was I gonna say? I think I'm being followed by an old man. She's kind of nice, and we're talking for a bit, and she says to me, where am I going and coming from? She then suggests that I stop for the night and starts to tell me about the dangers of driving sleepy. I took a look around and said, yeah, I will stop for the night, but she tells me that if I go down the road A couple of blocks near the 7-Eleven there's a motel. I look around and don't see the car anymore. I decide that I will stop for the night and go in for a sleep. As I pull up to the motel, I decide to park the truck away from this area, and I ended up going quite far behind the motel so that I don't have to be seen from the road. I got into the motel room as quickly as I can and locked the door. I can honestly say that I didn't get much rest. I watched TV and nodded off, and I would be wide awake at every sound. My mind kept racing back to recalling all of the events before the California border, to my conversations with the police. Maybe he saw me talking to the cops and decided to take off. Maybe he was waiting for me to pull over at another rest stop and complete his plan, whatever it is. But why would a stranger invite another stranger to his house in the middle of the night at a rest stop? Why did he ask me if I was having problems with the truck? Finally, it's about 7 AM, and I decided that enough is enough, and I get up to go out and check what's happening and have a big breakfast and then continue on to my office without anything weird happening. But I've always wondered what happened that night. Was I actually being followed or what? I was helping a friend move, and I needed to drive quite a long way for this. I'm somebody who didn't have that much of an issue with driving long distances because it was something I actually done for my job, and I had quite a lot of room in the back of my truck, so it was a relatively easy thing for me to do. Now, driving at night wasn't always something I was necessarily confident with, however. I was aware of the dangers of the roads and nodding off, so I made sure that I always had a really good supply of coffee and everything. Now, at this point in my life, things were going pretty good, but not really perfect, and I felt like it was lacking in a couple of areas. And there was a number of things that I wanted to change, and I was a little bit confused about, so I thought maybe by going on this trip, I was going to kind of clear my head up in the journey and find enlightenment or something. So I set out for this particular trip relatively early, and it was quite a good thing. I'm able to miss a lot of traffic this way, where people are already at work, and I'm probably going to miss the people that are coming out of work too, because I'm getting away from the big city now. And I had no issue with this. I managed to make ground pretty good, and I was feeling fairly confident. After making some pretty good progress, I saw a gas station that I decided I was going to pull over to. So I start to fill up with gas, and I realised that the person in there is kind of looking at me funny. I don't know why, but they were just sort of staring at me, giving me the old side eye, and I thought, oh boy, this is great. I'm going to have problems now when I go in there. Sighing, I can finish filling up my truck, then head in. I say, hey, how's it going? And he says, sorry, you can't fill up that truck. You can only fill up buildings, and starts bursting out laughing. Now, I don't know if this is the worst attempt of a joke that I've heard for a long time or what, but it was pretty weird. And the way he was laughing was almost like hysterically. I handed over the money and he said, yeah, I'm gonna get the change in the back, and headed out. I said, no, it's fine, and started to leave when he says, hey, don't leave, and I quickly get back in my truck and leave. I was actually worried that I hadn't filled up with fuel at this point, and maybe it was just water or something stupid, and he was trying to trap me there, but this was the first thing that was odd. You know, it wasn't one of those mainstream ones, it was like a franchise thing, but it looked really dodgy. I suppose it wasn't a good time to stop or place, but I needed to. So yeah, fueled up and ready to go, I continue on my journey now. After a good number of hours, it's starting to get pretty late, and I'm actually off of the main roads taking some back roads. I do this for a little while, and I don't see any other cars, until eventually one shows up. It's kind of half trailing behind me, but just keeping out of sight, so it's quite different than anything I've ever experienced before. It kind of looks like how I guess you'd imagine an undercover cop car following another, but it wasn't a cop car. It was a really old rickety thing, and I couldn't really see much of it, just other than the fact it was a bit rusty. It didn't even have good headlights, it was that bad. Now, I started to go a bit slower so it could overtake me, but it just held right back. Now again, I go even slower hoping that this thing won't follow me, but it still held back. I now resorted to pulling over to the side of the road, putting my hand out the window and waving them forward. I waited and waited for probably a good 10 minutes or so, expecting them to pass, but nothing happened. I think this is extremely bizarre, and start the car again and head on out. Not actually sure where they've gone. I just presumed that they'd stopped for some random reason or headed back, which would be weird regardless, but there's not really too many other things I could have imagined it being. Now, pretty keen to get off of the dirt roads, I start to pick up the pace a little bit and occasionally have to put my main beams on because it's quite dark here. But of course, it's not too great for your car battery to do so all the time, but I didn't have much of a choice. I even nearly ran over some animal, but managed to stop in time. But eventually I make it back to civilization, and I think that's the last I'm going to see of them, whoever it was. Now, at this point I'm starting to run low on gas again. I'm pretty convinced whatever I filled up with before was somehow diluted and that I'd kind of been scammed a bit. But I got further away from them and that made me feel good, so I wasn't going to complain too much. Now as I'm driving, I can see another gas station up ahead. Now if the other one wasn't the best, this one that I was looking at right here made that look like the Ritz Hotel. It was really bad. But again, faced with not much of a choice, I had to go in there. I made a note to myself that I had to plan these trips a bit better around getting the correct fuel, because I can't keep doing this. And I didn't know how many more times this was going to happen on the trip. I can see there's no other cars around, but they do have a light on, a single light. I began filling up with the fuel, and the same thing happened weirdly as before. I'm kind of just getting the feeling that I'm being stared at, and I look, and once again, somebody looking like they've just come out of a horror show is staring at me. They're quite big and menacing, and clearly missing teeth, just side-eyeing me. They're trying not to make it obvious, but it kind of looks like when a dog's glancing at you when you're eating food and you look at it and it looks away. Yeah, it's pretty weird. And then, I notice a car stops next to me. Now they slow completely down, and there's a bunch of people staring at me that I can't make out too well. They kind of just give me a dirty look, and I just look back at them confused and they drive off. I think, God, I really am in the middle of nowhere now. These people really want to make me feel like I'm not welcome here, and I reluctantly head inside to go and pay for the gas. Now, I had exact change with me, so I was pretty happy that I didn't have to wait around. I get in there and he just stares at me. I say, hey, and he says hey back in a low voice like he's completely detached. I then realise that I really need to pee suddenly, and I quickly ask the guy if I can use the restroom. He says, yeah, that's fine, it's just in the back there. And I head over. Now this restroom is extremely dark and in horrible condition. There's only one cubicle thing and a small window near it. There's one light too, and if you close the door to the toilet it kind of blocks out the light, but that was the least of my concerns. I head in and relieve myself and go to leave when I realise the door's stuck. I think, God, is everything going to go wrong today? I kind of punched on it a bit and pushed it, but it would not budge. And that's when I realised something was wrong. The lock didn't actually go on properly. I say, hey, can you help? I'm stuck here. And that's when I hear the sounds of footsteps. And I can hear breathing. And it's not just the sounds of one person, it's the sounds of multiple people. I kind of go down and I can see at least 5 or 6 feet all surrounding the cubicle. And clearly somebody's leaned up against the door. I bite my hand trying not to scream as I try and figure out an escape plan. I realise that I have to pretend that I'm going along with it and say, hey, I'm going to try and open the door again, just wait. I slowly tiptoe onto the toilet then, and I try and think of options how to escape. I start putting my own force on the door and pretend that I'm trying to budge it open when I realise my only escape is through that little toilet window. The thing is, I don't know whether I'm going to fit through it, but I don't really have much of a choice. I say, hey, get back, I'm going to kick the door now if anybody's there. And I start pretending to thud on the door. While doing that, I slowly climb up to the window, and within probably less than a second, I managed to kick the window open and quickly slide out. I ended up leaving my jacket there in the process, but that was the least of my concerns. I hop down and immediately start sprinting. I'm not looking behind myself, I'm just completely engrossed with trying to get out of there. I sprint probably for another 10 seconds and make it to my truck. I quickly get in, find the keys as quick as I can and start the engine and literally floor it out of there. I had 1 second to look behind and I can see that whoever was in the till had now moved outside and was near the tree line. I drove at absolute top speed pretty much for probably a good 20 minutes and I burnt through so much fuel, but I didn't care. I was so tired and just ready to get over to the friend's house that I didn't stop driving until I eventually reached it, with the fuel gauge basically on empty. When I arrived, I ended up falling asleep immediately, and I woke up the next day feeling absolutely exhausted. I started telling my friend about what had happened, and he said, yeah, there's some really weird people out there, you've got to be careful. I asked him if he ever heard of anything similar, and apparently people disappear along that stretch of road all the time. I eventually completed the move with him, and I drove back a complete different way, which actually added a whole day to the journey, but I was never going to chance going back there again. Now, I've always wanted to try the car life thing after watching so many people who have done it before, travelling around the country, and I lived in Fort Lauderdale for 5 years and thought I would be stuck there and that was it. Then the pandemic hit and I checked my bank account and I was back paid thousands. Before I know it, I'm packing up all of my stuff and the landlord said I could leave all my furniture that was there and that's fine. I'm now on 95 heading north, laughing and actually leaving, and couldn't believe it. I managed to get a hang of the whole car life thing and it seemed somewhat normal and comfortable being able to stealth park in different locations without detection. I had not done any off the grid stuff yet, but was more comfortable by the time I reached the lake, Tahoe. I was hiking and asked some guy with his dog, who's local, if I could sleep in my car because Tahoe seems tricky. He said that there was a place up the mountains called Hope Valley. It sounded good, so off I went. Now Lake Tahoe is already very high in altitude, so it was a few thousand feet higher than that. And it was past July. As I reached the area, I saw a small parking lot that was an entrance to a wildlife nature preserve. It was closed and empty, so that would do. I'm all settled in with my blanket and the sun setting and the temperatures plummeting. Before I know it, it's pitch black and zero visibility. I start to hear wolves howling, and at this point I'm game. This was the experience I wanted. It was a little creepy, but I was fine. I was living what I would normally be watching on the internet, but before the sun went down, I noticed there were garbage cans that were overfilled 15 feet from the car entrance at the preserve. Finally, I drifted off asleep and was awakened by something at 3 AM. You couldn't see anything. Anyway, it was so dark, but I overheard the footsteps, heavy ones, right outside the door. At this point, I'm really worried. Then something brushes up against the car, and I'm scared as I don't know what to do. I wait for a couple of minutes, then I open the door. I run around the car as fast as possible to the driver's side. Drove down the mountain and slept in a Motel 7 parking lot like a baby. Never made it through my first and only off-the-grid camping adventure, and I won't forget it. The only other time that something creepy happened was up in Mount Shasta. I drove halfway up the mountain, parked on the side of the road and got out and started walking into this trail. I made it about 70 yards in and I hear a low growl. I've never ran so fast in my life. The rest of the trip was the best I ever did in Montana. Now, English isn't my first language, so sorry in advance if this doesn't read too well. Now, I'd been working on a farm throughout the summer. I'd actually been living on site pretty much to save money, and because my truck was quite big. Now, I was very excited to get back home. The particular day come when I set off and I said goodbye to the people I was working with because I knew I probably wouldn't see them again, because soon I'd be going to attend college and I was excited for that. Up ahead of me was a long drive and I was really looking forward to it, so I say my goodbyes and I set off. Now when I begin to drive, it's raining quite heavily and I actually think it was really nice, to be honest. I couldn't see too far up ahead of me, but it meant that I was in a nice peaceful area where I could really be away from everyone. It took me about a good 5 minutes of driving before I eventually get out into the main roads. Now the main roads are nice and there's not really many other cars around. I'd see the other occasional ones, but the closer it got to dark, the fewer and fewer they would become. There was quite a lot of houses around where I was driving, but not too many because I was getting closer and closer to the forest, and obviously when you're there there's not as many houses because there's not as much space for them. I eventually make a turn and finally enter the forest and it's really beautiful. There's the odd bus station that I pass, but not really much of anything. I'm not driving too quick at this time because it's still pretty wet where I am, so I just have to be cautious and just let my mind drift off. I'm kind of more focused on what I'm going to do next and what my next steps are, because obviously I'm excited to go studying and it's a science degree, so it's going to be pretty involved and it should open lots of opportunities for me to study wherever I want afterwards too and get the jobs I want. Now every couple of meters I realise that the trees seem to be getting more and more dense and it's really nice. I guess it's basically me going deeper and deeper into the mountainy areas. Now, I'm doing this for quite a while until eventually I reach some snow. Now again, it was raining and the snow was just off at the side of the road, but it's really beautiful. I'm actually somebody who absolutely adores the snow, and I always find it exciting to be out in it, just not if I'm driving, especially because where I am too, I'm grateful that it's not on the road, because if I go off the edge, I'm pretty much dead. It's hard to describe, but around some of these bends, the road literally is almost a sheer drop. Even some of the trees are sideways and they've just kind of adapted to it. But being a measly human, I wasn't adapted so well, so if I got into a car wreck here, you probably wouldn't be hearing me writing this story now. But thankfully I didn't. Now, some of my friends asked me if I saw any animals while on this trip, and not really, to be honest. We do get deers and those kind of animals, but around here there wasn't much of anything. I guess they just stay away from the roads and it's really a good thing. Now, as I'm driving, I can now see the mountains and it's really beautiful. I'm actually driving more in the middle of the road now because I can see there's no other cars in front of me and it's actually safer. If you're going around tight bends like this and you know you're on your own, you don't really want to be on the absolute edge, because obviously you don't want to be chancing it going off the side. Now I do this for a while until I encounter another car up ahead. This one looks really beat up, but I think no issue. It seems to be driving painfully slow at first, so I slowly at the next opportunity overtake it carefully on a wooden bridge. Now, as I'm driving, I realise that it has its hazards on, and I stop too. I quickly fling mine on and I think, God, I wouldn't want to be stuck out here on my own. The other issue too is there's not really good reception here, so it can be quite a big issue if you need to get into contact with others for more help. Now, I can't really see much because most of the windows are blacked out, but I can just see a hand come down. What's strange is they're wearing quite big gloves, which you wouldn't really want to drive in. I mean, I wouldn't. And they just point forward as though I should keep going. I just wave goodbye and do a friendly beep of the horn and continue on my way. I didn't think much of them, but I do remember taking a couple of seconds to look in my mirror as I slowly go around the corner and they disappear amongst the rain and mist. Not thinking much of it, I continue on my journey. I didn't have too much further to go before I could get to the first stop on my trip. There was some cabins that had basically been converted into little, I guess you call them motels, but places where you can just pay to stay for a couple of nights. Maybe hotel, I don't know how you guys differentiate it. But I pull up into the first one that I paid for and all is good. I enter the code that I've been sent and I go in. This place is absolutely lovely and I was really looking forward to my rest. I've been on the road for a while now and I think it's important to take lots of breaks, especially when you're on dangerous roads like this. So now, with everything going well, I make myself a coffee and start watching some TV. To be honest, the shows are absolutely terrible and I get so bored I just idly watch the news until I decide that I need to do something more exciting and I head out. I didn't go far, I just had a general walk around and tried to appreciate some of the scenery, but the rain was picking up quite a lot now. I turned to go back in when I realised something odd. There's a car parked up the road that I didn't notice before. It's just past a bridge, and it looks almost identical to the one that I'd seen before. In fact, I'm certain it is, but I didn't take a chance to check the registration plate. So I strain my eyes and try and notice it, but I realise I don't have one. I think maybe it's just some old beat up car somebody's abandoned there. I had decided that I should just head back in and not think too much of it. So I eventually drift off watching the boring news and wake up again and I'm pretty happy. I make sure everything's nice and tidy and I get back in my truck and continue on my way. It's still raining now, just not as bad as before, and as I pull onto the road, I glance behind myself and I see that there's no other car there now. So I think it's odd. I think maybe some of the scrap people wanted to do something with it and just left it there, but I don't know. I'm not really worried about it, more of my journey. So once again, I'm on the roads and the trees are actually more bright now, and I'm kind of in more of a logger's area at this point. I now make it into another, more densely wooded area and the rain's really picked up and it's actually quite hard to see now. It's the kind of rain that if you stood outside with the wind would actually really hurt your eyes and is quite annoying. But all it means is I have to drive a bit more slow, but it really makes it immersive with your surroundings. It almost feels like you're in an infinite loop almost, you know, like in video games where the map hasn't loaded properly in the background. It's sort of similar to that, but again, I just adjust my driving style and continue on. I haven't really got much of a reason to stop, and every so often I can see where the loggers have done their work and it looks beautiful. I eventually make it back into another wooded area, which is more like where I was before, and the rain slowly stops, which I'm actually quite grateful for. You know, some people don't really adjust to the rain as well as I do, and they just drive like everything's normal, and for me that's a pretty dangerous thing really. I always think the biggest danger when you're driving is kind of other drivers, because some people honestly do really stupid things, but I guess that's not something that's going to change anytime soon, and it's pretty out of my control really, so I don't like to complain about it too much. Now I make it to an area where I guess that the rain clouds have stopped and it's actually bone dry almost. You get the odd mossy tree and whatnot, but there's not really too much there. But it's actually nicer than what I was driving in before, so again I'm grateful for it. And I'm coming up to my second rest area. Now this area is actually quite good and it's more of a modern building than a cabin. There's a few other people there too. I say hello and go into my room, and everything's normal basically at this point. I realise that again, there's not even anything to watch on TV. Not being able to bear watching the news idly, I just decide to go for a walk in the forest nearby. There's actually a trail path which is quite nice, so I head off into here. Now, as I set off, I realised that there's not many people around here. I know there's an odd bus that can come up this kind of hill thing, but I haven't seen one since the whole time that I've been in this area. And I do think this is odd, but again, I don't really live in a densely populated area, so again, this is kind of to be expected. I have some water with me, and I'm just carrying this in one hand while on my phone in the other. I don't really know where I'm going, but I have a rough idea, and luckily my map service is working well. And I go to an area that's supposed to have a nice view, but there really isn't anything there. While walking, I stop to see if anybody's around, and I do notice one person. Strangely, they were walking and stopped the moment that I turned around and just kind of stood there perfectly still. They were wearing a big raincoat and I couldn't really see much else, but they kind of slowly gone behind a tree, but extremely slowly, like I don't know whether this was actually a person or not. It was pretty bizarre, but I don't think too much of it, deciding to continue on the loop to get back to where I'm staying. And I get back and just settle in for the night, and nothing odd really happens here. End up waking up and getting in my truck again for the final leg of where I need to go. Now, when I'm in my truck, everything's as it should be, so I'm relatively content. I do notice a strange smell similar to gasoline, but I'm pretty convinced it's coming from one of the other cars in the lot here, and I set off on my way. Now, annoyingly, my phone decides to take me on a detour which is guiding me the rest of the way home, and it takes me through another forest. Now, this forest is not too heavily populated. By that I mean pretty much nobody here. There's kind of a path which goes through the middle of it, but it's not really the best built one. It's kind of like gravelly, but you know when the middle part of it's smooth and the sides are like little rocks or stones or whatever you call it? It's like that. And every so often I have to completely go onto the other side of this road to avoid trees which are half fallen. Nobody ever comes to really service the road clearly, and it's not the kind of place that you want to stop again. It's one of those where if you go off the side of the road, most of it's into little crevasses, or I don't know how you say it, but those things that you can just drop your car into and not come out of again. Kind of like in Jurassic Park maybe. But yeah, it's not really the best of conditions. And while you're driving, you actually kick up quite a lot of dust behind you, so it actually becomes quite difficult to see if anybody's approaching behind you. And the other issue I realise this will create is if another car's coming, all you're going to see is a big dust cloud ahead of you and just have to stop and hope they don't hit you. I was prepared though. I'd turn on my lights in the event of this happening, but it didn't. I go further and further, and I finally see a car park. Now, to my absolute surprise, I see that same car once again, the beat up one I'd seen before without a registration plate on it, which I do think is extremely bizarre, but I just convinced myself that this place is quite small and they're probably just going the same way that I am, and don't think too much of it. Deciding now that it's probably a good time to get out of the forest, I actually step on it a little bit. That's when I realised something strange. I don't seem to be getting any closer to the destination that I thought I was. It's almost like I've been going in a big circle, which is bizarre. I check my phone again, and I can't seem to get any signal, which is really annoying. I ended up pulling over at the side of the road, and I noticed a new dilemma. I'm pretty much out of fuel, which is really strange, because I was convinced I had a full tank the night before almost, having recently filled it up, but now there wasn't anything there. Something else strange, one of my back tyres is out, which again was fine. I did look for a sign of a puncture, but I couldn't see anything, and I think, wow, this is really good. The thing was, I wasn't that far away from completing my journey, and I was half tempted to try and limp it. I mean, if I had the fuel I would, and if it was only the bad tyre, but this wasn't the case. So what I do now is I try and make some calls, but again I get no signal. It's starting to get dark now, and I realise that I probably need to get some sleep in. Annoyingly, I'm just kind of pulled over to the side of the road, so I decide to get back in my truck and try and take it further off the main road, because I don't really want a car to come speeding down here and hit me not seeing me, because obviously when I'm sleeping I won't have the lights on. So this is what I do, and I settle in. I had enough water and stuff like that, but it wasn't necessarily going to be comfortable, because I had to recline the seat and just lay my clothes over me to stay nice and warm at night. It wasn't actually cold outside, which is really important, but it wasn't really comfortable sleeping. I realised I had to keep moving onto my side or I didn't feel very good. I'm one of those people where unless I sleep on a comfortable bed, I really have muscle and bone aches the next day. I start watching a show on my phone though, and again, that runs out, and without signal I can't load new ones. All of my downloaded ones had been watched before, so I decided to try and sleep. Now, I managed to sleep for about probably 2 hours, and then I'm woken again by sunlight. Now, as I start to slowly open my eyes, I can see a beautiful goldish glow everywhere, and I think this is a sunset that I actually want to appreciate, so I try and make myself wake up a bit more. Then I realise how warm it is too, and I can't wait to get outside. I don't really wake up too quickly and quickly down my water in an attempt to wake up quicker, and that's when I notice something odd. There is a distinct smell of burning, and it doesn't seem to be coming from very far away. I now sit up completely and look around, and through my blurry eyes, I can see something awfully wrong. There's fire, and it's in all directions around me. Now, I don't know what caused the fire or how big it is, but it looks like I'm in the middle of a forest fire. I let out a really loud yelp, and I quickly unlock my car doors and open the door, and I kid you not, there are flames all around me. Absolutely petrified and not knowing what to do, I quickly grab the remainder of my water and throw it towards the edge of the fire, where that I think I can see an opening, and thank God it actually worked. I jump through this gap and quickly sprint about another 20 meters before checking if there's anything on me on fire. That's when I notice a second strange thing. The fire only seems to be coming from my truck. Literally, the rest of the woods are completely fine, but it's just this specific area. Panicking, I sprint forward and sprint backwards, trying to see where else the fire is and what way I need to flee. But I realise now that it's literally only coming from a circle around my truck. Now, what's worse is I don't have my phone, but I just accept it's gone. And I look on as I see that my truck starts to set on fire. This was an old truck, but it's one that I absolutely love, so I'm actually quite disappointed to see this. That's when I noticed something else odd. Just in the distance, I can see the silhouette of a person once more. Now it's hard to see through the flames, but I'm absolutely certain that somebody was watching from behind a tree. As my eyes adjust, I can then see a disgusting teethy smile coming back at me. And the next thing I knew, I was sprinting in the other direction. Now I can't say for certain that this person tried to kill me in there, but it seems really bizarre. The more I'm thinking of it while jogging, the more that I have fuel to continue running. Now I probably ran for about a good 25 minutes, and luckily there's no other fires around me. Occasionally I peer over my shoulder to try and see if anybody's following me, but luckily there's no one. I don't know where I'm running, and I'm literally getting ready for woodland survival now. I have a basic idea of what I need to do, but I realise that the sun's starting to rise, the true sunrise, not the false one which I was mistaken by before, and I know that I have to try and hike my way out of here as my only escape method. I begin doing so, and I soon realise that I'm not that far from an actual road. I quickly cut through the forest as quick as I can and eventually make it out to here. I've managed to catch my breath while walking, and I tried desperately to flag down a car. Annoyingly, the first two just go straight past me, then eventually another one comes and I'm able to flag them down. I say, please can you help me, something's happened to my car and I really need to make a call to the police. Luckily this stranger was absolutely understanding and honestly like an angel, offering to drive me over to the police station. I start explaining briefly what happened and they can see by the fear in my face that I'm not lying to them. And I get to the station and thank them profusely. I then go in to make a police report and I drink a hot chocolate which was really well needed. I'm actually super tired now, and once I've made my statement, the police say that they're quickly going to send someone over there. They were very accommodating and actually let me sleep in a room they had there, and I basically knocked out. I think it's from the adrenaline dump of everything that made me especially tired, but I remembered waking up to a knock on the door, and they say, hey, I've got some good and bad news. The good news is we found exactly where you said, but the bad news is we've got no truck and no idea how this could have happened. They tell me that they're going to investigate and give me a reference number, and I then get offered to have a ride home the rest of the way, which I gratefully take. I eventually make it back to my actual home and I don't know what to think. I go indoors, put the keys down and put my little reference number down that's written on paper, and I just lay on the bed. Now, paranoid, I immediately jump up at the first sound of a car looking for the silvery colour one I'd seen before, multiple times, suddenly connecting more dots. Maybe that car that I'd seen so conveniently at the same places of me wasn't by coincidence, maybe it was somebody following me. Now, I don't want to point the finger too much, but if what I'm thinking's true, this person had literally tried to murder me out in the woods for God knows what reason, and had purposefully cut the fuel in my tank and messed up a tyre, waiting for this to happen. Now, if this is the case, it must have been somebody who knew the area very well, or at least where I was going, and that's what really scares me. Eventually, I called the police line again, and every time I have since, they tell me that they haven't found any other leads. I know by now the case will be closed because nobody was actually hurt, and I know that I'm never going to get that truck back again, but I'm kind of left with more questions than answers.